They came in the dead of night, or at midday among the bustling crowds, or in the quiet intervals that bracketed a lord's dinner. No drumbeats announced their arrival. No ravens carried warning. They were the Faceless men, the elusive assassins of the House of Black and White in Bravos. And they moved through the 7 kingdoms like whispers of death, weaving invisibly through the chaos that had engulfed Westeros since the wars began. It was said the Faceless men could take any face, slip into any role. Some believed them a myth, others prayed to never find out the truth of their existence. Yet when the kill orders came this time, the entire game changed. For the first time in generations, perhaps centuries, their meticulously balanced neutrality seemed to tilt in one direction: destroy every major claimant to the throne. What power had arranged such a thing? What monstrous wealth had been paid to unleash the House of Black and White upon all of Westeros remained a riddle. Yet the nightmares would come to pass, letter by letter, name by name. A day would come when the Iron Throne sat empty, draped in more than just the illusions of power, because the Faceless men never missed their mark. And from the moment the first coin was laid on that cold marble altar in Bravos, the fate of kings, queens, princes, pretenders, and would-be saviors was sealed. They were all walking corpses and did not know it. The first to go was the one who believed herself the least vulnerable, Cersei Lannister, Queen Regent, proud lioness of the Westerlands. She had always enveloped herself in illusions of invulnerability. Even in the aftermath of her father's demise, even with the High Sparrow's humiliation still haunting her steps, she believed none could truly threaten her as long as the Red Keep's walls stood and the Lannister gold kept forging alliances. But the coin placed upon the altar bore her name, and the House of Black and White is as patient as the slowest heartbeat. No one knew the assassin who came for her. No one saw a new face among the throng of small folk toiling in the Red Keep's kitchens. Those who might have noticed an unfamiliar pair of hands scrubbing pots or changing bed linens merely accepted it as the kingdom's desperate times. Hands come and go. No one spares them a second glance, especially in a place like King's Landing where half the city was perpetually in flux. In the late hours of the evening, when darkness clung to the halls like a living being, Cersei found herself in her solar with a cup of arbor gold in hand. She had been brooding over new plots, new ways to tighten her grip on her young son, King Tommen. Ever since the Faith militant fiasco, she felt more vulnerable, but her pride refused to yield to fear. At times, she whispered to herself that she should have listened more carefully to the counsel of those who had tried to curb her impulses, but it was not in her nature to yield to any counsel but her own. The assassin who stepped into her solar wore a face that had no real significance. He was just a boy, perhaps 14 by the shape of him, and the queen did not even look up from her wine. He could have been a messenger or a newly assigned page. Then he moved so swiftly she caught only a glimpse, a swirl of brown homespun, a blade reflecting the candlelight. She opened her mouth to call for her guards, but the dagger found its home in her breast before she could form the first vowel. She stared at the boy assassin, wide-eyed, her goblet dropping to the floor with a dull thunk. The wine spread darkly across the floorboards, mingling with her own blood. She collapsed with a faint, gurgling cry. The last thing she felt was the swirl of the assassin's clothes against her cheek as he stepped over her body, retrieving the dagger with a dispassionate grace. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the hush of finality. By the time the guards realized something was amiss, the killer had vanished, as if he were never there. No one in King's Landing suspected the truth yet. Rumors pointed to old enemies of the queen, internal conspirators, or perhaps some lowly disgruntled servant who had seized a moment's opportunity. But to the House of Black and White, the debt was paid. One name stricken from the ledger. Her death sent a tremor of panic through King's Landing. To lose a monarch or regent was no new affair. The realm had endured many such tragedies in recent years. But the queen's assassination within the Red Keep, that was something else. Even in the time of war, that fortress was considered a bastion. Now the lords and ladies who jockeyed for power in the court felt a chill breeze in their hearts. If Cersei Lannister, with all her cunning and cruelty, could be cut down so easily, who among them was safe? But the next name on the list didn't wait long to follow. Stannis Baratheon, the one-time king at the Wall, the man who had insisted he was the rightful king by all law and reason, had retreated to the north in a final desperate grasp for an ally. Winter weighed heavy upon those frozen fields. His troops were battered, demoralized. His prestige was in tatters after the defeat near Winterfell. Even the Red Priestess who once guided him was nowhere to be found, having left or vanished into the snows. Some said that in his final days, Stannis lived in a half-wrecked keep near the Gift, forging letters to any southern lord who might still heed him, huddling for warmth and hoping to gather the remnants of his scattered forces. He had no illusions of safety, but in his darkest moments, he must have believed that if he could just bide his time, rebuild, wait out the fierce snows, a new opportunity might arise. Such is the perennial dream of exiled claimants, that tomorrow might bring a shift in fortune. The assassin arrived in the form of a traveling hedge knight who had turned up at the collapsed gates, half frozen, offering fealty. Stannis refused at first. He was never one to trust easily, but the knight carried with him a letter, apparently from some minor house sworn to Baratheon in days gone by. None in Stannis' reduced garrison could read well enough to question the letter's authenticity. So, in the hope of one day mustering a new force, the diminished king in the north welcomed the stranger. The night was cold, a fierce wind howling through empty corridors as Stannis bent over a map by candlelight. The assassin, silent as the hush after a final breath, approached from behind. Stannis turned, recognition dawning too late. He tried to swing his sword, Lightbringer in name, though its fabled flames were long gone. But the assassin's short spear slid forward, angled upward through the gap of his breastplate. Stannis' mouth opened in shock, a thick breath of vapor swirling from his lips. He coughed out words that never formed. The last thing he saw was a face shifting before him, a curious swirl, or perhaps his mind was addled by blood loss. He imagined for a heartbeat that he saw the face of Renly young and smiling at him with pity. Then the world went black. Not a single soldier in that battered keep saw the assassin slip away. Face changed once more to become a fleeing old woman, or perhaps a young stable boy, or possibly both in turn. The storms took the few footprints that might have betrayed a clue. By morning, all that remained was the corpse of King Stannis Baratheon, rightful heir according to the letters, undone by an assassin's blade. Rumors spread like a winter plague across the war-torn land. 2 contenders to the Iron Throne, gone in swift succession. Some superstitious smallfolk whispered of ghosts or the old god's vengeance. Others believed an unknown alliance was targeting the High Lords, using cunning and infiltration. In the Red Keep, Tommen Baratheon was still enthroned, but few looked to the boy king with any real confidence. Even fewer believed Tommen would last long without his mother's iron will to guide him. Indeed, that was the next tragedy. Tommen's murder came scarcely a fortnight after his mother's. This time, the assassin wore the face of a traveling bard who arrived in King's Landing in the wake of the Queen's funeral. The boy king had been sad, lost in the swirl of a court too large and dangerous for his innocent mind. The child had never truly learned the cruel realities of leadership, and in the quiet hours after a lavish feast, he found some comfort in the gentler amusements. A singer, perhaps, reciting a soothing ballad, was exactly what his confused heart yearned for. And so, one evening, Tommen and a small retinue of knights, septons, and counselors dined in a private hall, while the bard performed soft verses. A hush fell when the new bard sang the Song of the Seven, the one that always made Tommen's eyes grow moist. The child king dabbed his eyes, overcome by sorrow for his mother, father, siblings. In that unguarded moment, the bard stepped forward, kneeling in supplication as though to end the performance with a gracious bow. But from beneath the traveling cloak, a stiletto flicked into view. The bard lunged, and Tommen had only a breath to jerk backward. The stiletto pierced his throat, slicing through soft flesh with surgical precision. The boy king's eyes went wide, and he gasped a final gurgle of surprise and pain. The bard, assassin, dragged the blade free and whirled to confront the retinue. In the ensuing uproar, the assassin leaped backward, using the chaos of knights tumbling over chairs, the high table, the half-screaming counselors. A thrown dagger caught one knight in the face. Another slash felled a second guard. By the time the archers stationed outside the hall burst in, the assassin had disappeared into the labyrinth of the Red Keep's corridors. Guards pursued a fleeing figure that changed once, twice, like illusions in the flickering torchlight, until no one was certain whom they were chasing. And so the House of Lannister lost its final living route to the throne, aside from Jaime, who had renounced claims, and Tyrion, who was an outlaw. The Child King was gone, leaving King's Landing reeling. Suddenly, the city found itself in the midst of an unforeseen crisis. No recognized monarch, no immediate regent, and no coherent plan to choose the next occupant of the Iron Throne. Word traveled across the seas, across the desert roads, across the length of every ravaged kingdom. In Meereen, the mother of dragons, Daenerys Targaryen, heard rumors that both Stannis and the Lannister boy king were dead. She felt a surge of hope. Perhaps the Seven Kingdoms were collapsing under their own weight, leaving an empty seat for her to claim. But she did not know that in Braavos her name was also etched upon a coin. Her face whispered in the black halls, where men come to pray to the many-faced god. Yet even as Daenerys considered her next move, her city was riddled with unrest. She had tried to bring peace, to break chains, to prove that she was not the same as the slave masters of old. But she found ruling more complicated than conquering, and her dragons were not as easily controlled as she once imagined. Still, she believed destiny favored her. She was the unburnt, the breaker of chains, the rightful heir to a throne usurped decades ago. She believed that her path back to Westeros was all but guaranteed once she stabilized Slaver's Bay. She did not notice the new face among the freedmen who served her intimately in the pyramid halls. She did not suspect that one of those who bowed so willingly might be something else entirely, a living shadow, a living prayer to the many-faced god. That is, until she saw the glint of a dagger in the corridor outside her private chambers. And the blade did find her flesh, gliding through the air with a speed beyond her expectations. But Daenerys Targaryen, though not a warrior by training, had survived many trials. She lurched aside, the dagger grazing her left shoulder. The assassin, though skilled, had perhaps misjudged the moment. Dany's scream alerted two Unsullied who rushed in, spears leveled. The assassin, trapped in a corner, seemed to vanish behind a tapestry. The guards tore the tapestry down, but no one was there. Only a swirl of dark cloth, as the intruder leaped from a hidden passage, ducking the spears with inhuman agility. The clash that followed was short, silent, brutal. More Unsullied arrived. A second dagger flicked out, found an Unsullied's throat. Blood spurted. Another guard's spear lunged, but the assassin twisted, the blow glancing off the thick folds of cloth. Daenerys, pressing a hand to her wounded shoulder, watched with horror as the unstoppable killer flickered around the corridor like a wraith. She realized then that this was no ordinary cutthroat. Jorah Mormont, banished but recently returned, barreled into the hallway at the sound of the commotion. He roared, driving a short sword at the assassin. For a heartbeat, the assassin seemed poised to kill him too, but more Unsullied poured in. The assassin whirled, saw the odds, and fled in a sudden rush. In the confusion, no one knew which figure among the throng was the real intruder. One moment, it was a tall, rangy man in a hood. The next, a short, stocky woman in a slave's tunic was running for the exit. Then that figure too vanished around a corner. Guards thundered after illusions in every direction. Daenerys survived that night, but the attempt had shaken her to the core. She sensed it was no mere slip of infiltration. Something bigger was at play. Days later, rumors from Westeros confirmed the pattern. Claimants to the throne were being systematically eliminated. The whisper carried a name: the Faceless Men. The Targaryen queen remembered her Braavosi courtiers' tales of that dreaded order. She realized she had faced them and barely escaped with her life. But another attempt would surely come. She was not safe. She commanded the Unsullied to tighten security, to search every corner of Meereen, to question every suspicious face, and to ensure no unknown visitors gained entry to her presence. She could not sit idle, waiting for the next attempt. She resolved to sail for Westeros sooner rather than later, if only to confront this threat. Her dragons had grown larger. Perhaps they would serve as her best protection. In a hidden chamber of the House of Black and White, a young acolyte knelt before a kindly man, reciting the new orders. The first attempt on Daenerys Targaryen had failed, but the many-faced god would not be denied. Failure was an invitation to deeper cunning, to further patience. The order would not stop until the debt was paid. For a price had been offered, a contract accepted. The details of that contract were unknown to the lower echelons, but rumor held that a sum so enormous had changed hands that the entire Titan of Bravos might have been purchased thrice over. And with a price that dear, the House of Black and White would persist until every name on the list breathed their last. And so, across the sea, the purges continued. A new name rose to importance. Euron Greyjoy, the self-styled King of the Isles, cunning and vicious. He had carved a path of terror across the coasts, uniting Ironborn under his cryptic banners. If ever there was a wily, paranoid man who might sense the threat of the Faceless men, it was Euron. But his arrogance was as vast as the seas. He believed he could outmaneuver them. When a priest of the drowned god approached Euron's ship, seeking passage, Euron laughed. "You want to give me your blessings, priest?" he asked. The priest nodded, head bowed in humility. "Then bless my new conquest," Euron commanded, gesturing for the man to follow him below decks. Euron wanted to show off the half-mad relics he'd taken from remote corners of the world. Dragon eggs that might be worthless or genuine, Valyrian artifacts, occult tokens from Asshai. The drowned priest came quietly, chanting a whispered prayer. Below decks, Euron motioned to an iron-banded chest containing so-called mysteries. He turned away for a moment, rummaging for the key. That was the moment the priest attacked, surging forward with a coil of rope that whipped around Euron's neck. Surprised but never entirely off guard, Euron bellowed in rage. He elbowed the priest in the ribs, sending him staggering. The priest's face flickered. Was it an illusion in the lantern light? Euron roared, "Faceless fool!" They grappled. The priest was strong, surprisingly so, with hands that found Euron's throat, a dagger that slashed across his forearm. Euron growled, blood spattering the deck. He was a large man, powerful, hammered by years on the Iron Islands seas. He twisted the priest's wrist until bones snapped. The priest hissed and dropped the dagger, but a second blade slipped from a hidden sheath. Euron seized the assassin's wrist again, his own blood-streaked face contorted with fury. The battle raged in that cramped space, rocking with the ship's motion. At last, Euron knocked the dagger free and headbutted the priest. The assassin reeled, stunned. Euron grabbed a cudgel from a nearby crate and brought it down, cracking the man's skull with savage finality. The assassin slumped to the floorboards, face slack, features oddly shifting in death. Euron watched in grim fascination as the man's face, now stained with blood, seemed to lose all distinctiveness. Euron panted, pressing a hand to his wounded side. "So you've come for me," he muttered. "You'll need better than that." Laughter rumbled from his throat, though whether it was born of triumph or uneasy madness was unclear. Blood dripped from his gashes, but he remained standing. The priest-assassin was dead on the floor. Euron barked orders to his men. They dragged the body out, and Euron commanded them to display the corpse from the mast, in full view of any passing vessel. He wanted the world to know that Euron Greyjoy was not so easily undone by the House of Black and White. But the crow's eye slept uneasy that night, always glancing over his shoulder. Perhaps that single defeat would be all the impetus the Faceless men needed to redouble their efforts. In time he would learn fear. While Euron stewed and Daenerys plotted, the War of the Five Kings had effectively ended in a wave of corpses. But new claimants rose, each convinced destiny favored them. Margaery Tyrell had never named herself queen outright in the vacuum after Tommen's death, but she was a beloved figure in the Reach, and had supporters who whispered that she should rule as regent, or even queen in her own right, forging alliances to stabilize the real. Yet Margaery soon fell victim to the unstoppable tide. One day, as she strolled in the gardens of Highgarden, discussing with her grandmother Olenna the potential of forging a power block in the absence of a clear monarch, a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses. The assassin was a gardener, or so the household believed. A young man with calloused hands from turning soil. But in one fluid move he stepped forward, a slender poison-tipped hairpin in his palm. When Marguerite paused to admire a particularly vibrant bloom, the assassin pricked the back of her hand with that hairpin, so swiftly she might have thought it was just a thorn. She grimaced, then continued walking. A minute later, she stumbled, complaining of sudden dizziness. Olenna called for a maester. By the time help arrived, Marguerite's lips were blue, and her breath was gone. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, recognized the hallmark of murder when she saw it. She demanded the gardener be found, but the gardener was nowhere to be found. Or perhaps he was found in the stables an hour later, slumped with his throat cut, a victim of the real assassin who had simply borrowed his face. The Tyrell household reeled from the blow. Marguerite's death robbed the reach of its most cunning political mind, leaving Olenna old and furious, vowing vengeance. But how does one wage war on shadows? Yet the assassins were not all powerful. They could be wounded, they could fail, as in Urin's case. And they remained few in number, forced to move carefully. Nevertheless, the death toll soared. The would-be lords and ladies who had designs on the Iron Throne began to watch their backs with a paranoia that rivaled any plague. In Dorne, Prince Trystane Martell's supporters had tried to push him forward as a possible consort to Marguerite, or some other great lady, but that ambition died when a faceless woman, disguised as a handmaiden, slit his throat while he slept. In the Vale, there was talk of young Robin Arryn being manipulated into a claim. Someone with strong ties to the Eyrie might stake a precarious line to the throne. But an unseen assassin, disguised as a traveling maester, delivered a lethal dose of sweet milk, ending that fragile life before the boy even understood he was a contender. In every corner of the realm, the call continued. Men and women who had once boasted about their potential to rule found themselves checking their food for poison, locking their doors at night, and trusting no one. The specter of the faceless men hung over Westeros like a vulture. Even those who had never truly considered themselves claimants, like Edmure Tully, who was content to be left in peace, felt the claws of dread scraping at their hearts. For who knew how broad the faceless men's definitions might be, or how thorough the contract's instructions? Among all these names, one stood out for his cunning and resilience: Petyr Baelish, known as Littlefinger. He had maneuvered, manipulated, and contrived half the realm into chaos, always with an eye toward ultimate power, though he rarely spoke of it aloud. If the assassin's ledger included him, and it surely did, he intended to be ready. He had hidden vantage points, body doubles, illusions. He was perhaps the one man whose love of deception could rival the faceless men's skill. When the attempt finally came, it arrived in the form of a letter. Sealed with the Mockingbird sigil, it looked like one of Baelish's own correspondences. Curious and suspicious, Baelish opened it in the presence of Sansa Stark, who was disguised still under the name Elaine Stone in the Vale. The letter read, "You have sown the seeds of your own destruction. Even you must reap what you have planted." The words alone were innocuous, but they carried the tang of threat. Baelish burned the letter at once. "They will come for me, my dear Elaine," he said with that sly half-smile. "But let us see if they can find a man who is accustomed to wearing 1,000 masks already." That night, a figure roamed the halls of the Eyrie, someone who resembled a minor knight sworn to House Royce. The figure made inquiries, asked servants if Lord Baelish could be found in his solar or bedchamber. The servants answered with shrugs. "He's in the solar, I think," or "He was going to see Lady Elaine." At the same time, a woman wearing the face of a traveling seamstress knocked on the door to Baelish's private chambers. Inside, a shadow rose from the desk. The seamstress spoke quietly, requesting an audience for a new doublet. Baelish waved a hand. "You may enter." She approached with a half-lidded gaze, each step measured. Hidden beneath her voluminous sleeves was a fine stiletto, coated in a lethal venom. She was close enough to strike, close enough to end the Mockingbird's life. But as she lunged, Baelish moved with a speed that spoke of careful forethought. He had a short blade hidden under his cloak. Her stiletto whistled through the air, but Baelish sidestepped with cunning grace, grabbing her wrist, twisting. She stumbled. Another figure lunged from behind a curtain. Sansa Stark, holding a heavy iron candlestick. She struck the assassin in the back of the head, not with perfect force, but enough to disrupt. The assassin reeled. That was all Baelish needed. He drove his short blade into the woman's throat. A wet gasp escaped her. She sank to her knees, eyes wide with the uncomprehending shock of a faceless man. Faceless woman who had not anticipated such readiness. Baelish watched her dispassionately. He had guessed that an attempt would come, sooner rather than later. He was not the type to rely on chance. When the woman died, her features became disturbingly blank. Sansa, trembling, could hardly tear her eyes away from the face that seemed to melt into something nondescript. Baelish pressed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We are in more peril than ever, my lady," he whispered. "But for now, we live." He wasted no time disposing of the body. Within the hour, it was dropped from the moon door into the endless sky below, swallowed by wind and cloud. The Vale slept on, oblivious. But Baelish well knew this would not be the last attempt. The House of Black and White did not forsake a contract. The Mockingbird might evade them once or twice, but eventually, mistakes would be made. Baelish resolved to relocate, to vanish into one of his many bolt holes, always dragging Sansa along. Her safety mattered to him, in his own twisted way, though his ultimate goals remained as murky as ever. In the north, Jon Snow had been declared king in the north by acclamation after the Battle of the Bastards, though he neither sought the Iron Throne nor believed it his right. Still, talk spread that he might be the one to unite all the kingdoms. Some northern lords whispered he was a Targaryen by birth. Others said he was the rightful king if Rhaegar's line was still potent. But Jon Snow wanted none of it. He only wanted to defend the realm against the threats beyond the wall. But with the spree of assassinations, the Faceless men did not discriminate. If the price was paid for every claimant, the question was whether Jon was considered a claimant. As tales circulated of his parentage, the possibility became too strong to ignore. And so the assassins began to shadow him as well. Unlike the lords of the South, Jon Snow resided among loyal companions who would die for him. At Winterfell, the remaining Stark loyalists and wildlings formed a fierce guard. Ghost, his direwolf, prowled the corridors. It was no small matter for an assassin to enter such a bastion unnoticed. Even so, the Faceless men were resourceful. The assassin this time took the identity of a blacksmith from Deepwood Motte, a man with a known trade, a face some of the men-at-arms recognized. After forging a few arrowheads, a few horseshoes, the blacksmith seemed entirely convincing. He waited for the perfect moment to approach Jon in the courtyard, presenting a newly crafted sword to replace Longclaw's scabbard. Jon, courteous despite his burdens, reached out to examine the metal. Then Ghost bristled, hackles raised, teeth bared. The dire wolf lunged, snapping at the blacksmith's arm. Jon recoiled, dropping the sword. Confusion flickered across his face. The blacksmith tried to twist away, but Ghost was relentless, clamping jaws around the wrist that held a hidden dagger. The steel weapon clattered to the ground. Jon realized in that instant what was happening. He bellowed for help. The blacksmith's features twisted with rage as he fought the direwolf's fierce bite. Then he reached down with his free hand, fumbling for the dagger. Jon seized the moment. Longclaw came free from its scabbard in a flash, Valyrian steel shimmering in the pale winter sun. He slashed once, driving the assassin backward. Ghost snarled, fur spotted with blood. The blacksmith fainted, tried to slip away, but Jon was no stranger to lethal duels. Steel clashed. Sparks flew. The assassin's skill was considerable, far greater than any average blacksmith might possess. But Jon had fought White Walkers, had stood against the toughest foes. He pressed forward, overcame the assassin's guard, and buried Longclaw in the man's chest. With a gasp, the blacksmith staggered, collapsing to his knees. Jon withdrew the blade, and the man's face shuddered, flickering, as if trying to cling to its borrowed identity. Jon stood there, panting, heart pounding, while the courtyard erupted in alarm. Soldiers rushed over. Ghost padded around the corpse, sniffing. Jon felt a chill deeper than the winter air. He knew well that no mortal threat had ever unsettled him as much as the thought that men could shift faces and slip among his people unseen. From that day on, Winterfell's security doubled, tripled. But if the House of Black and White insisted on taking Jon's life, no fortress might be safe enough. Still, the repeated failures to kill certain targets, Daenerys, Euron, Jon, Baelish, hinted at something. The Faceless men were lethal, but they were not gods. Some rose to the challenge, outwitting or outfighting them on certain occasions. Across Westeros, the power vacuum grew monstrous. With Cersei, Tommen, Stannis, Margaery, and countless others gone, there was no single figure to unify the realm. Rivals who might have seized the throne cowered behind locked doors or kept their ambitions silent, lest they, too, be marked. A hush fell over the great houses, like a realm in mourning, or a realm in terror. Meanwhile the nights grew longer, cold winds blew from the north, and rumors of the others, White Walkers, All the while, the Faceless men continued their silent hunt. Arya Stark, across the narrow sea, had once been an acolyte in the House of Black and White. She knew their ways intimately, had served them to an extent, only to break away and reclaim her identity as a Stark of Winterfell. In the city of Braavos, she heard quiet talk that her old mentors were unleashed upon the Seven Kingdoms in a grand contract. She felt an unease coil in her belly like a living serpent. Part of her yearned to return to Westeros, to check on her surviving siblings, to see if she could help them. Another part trembled at the notion of crossing paths with her old masters, particularly if they had deemed the Starks claimants. She lingered in the shadows of Braavos, gathering rumors. Faceless men rarely advertised their work, but the city's underbelly was alive with speculation. Some whispered that a king's ransom had been paid 100-fold, by some entity in the east, or by a coalition of wealthy lords from the free cities who sought to keep Westeros permanently divided. Others believed it was the Iron Bank that had orchestrated the cull, perhaps to enforce debts. Arya saw signs of the House of Black and White's extended operations. Novices she recognized, new faces at the docks, coded remarks in taverns. She knew them for what they were, instruments of the many-faced god. One night, as Arya roamed the canals, hood drawn low, she glimpsed a figure that made her heart lurch. It was the kindly man, the one who had trained her, standing on a marble bridge, his head bowed. A young child approached him, hand outstretched, and he offered the child a coin. Arya kept her distance, her heart pounding. She realized with a jolt that if he discovered her presence, she might be the next name on the list, especially if they suspected she was tangentially a Stark claimant. So she fled, cursing herself for her curiosity. Still, something burned within Arya's soul. Her family was under threat. Her homeland was infested with assassins. Perhaps she alone, a renegade trained in the same arts, could offer some hope of countering them. She stole passage on a Braavosi merchant ship departing for Gulltown, leaving behind the city that had once claimed her identity. Back in Westeros, chaos reigned. The small council in King's Landing was effectively defunct. With no monarch, the capital decayed into a nest of petty tyrants. Flea-bottom gangs took bolder steps, and the Gold Cloaks were leaderless. Some lesser Lannisters attempted to claim the regency, but those attempts ended swiftly. 2 were found dead in a brothel, throats slit in the black of night. Others simply vanished. In the Riverlands, Brienne of Tarth roamed in search of Sansa Stark, or any living Stark who might bring hope. She heard dreadful tales of the assassinations, the vanishings, the unstoppable deaths sweeping the land. She clutched Oathkeeper, swearing to keep her promise. But her own heart was heavy. Who was left to protect if all the claimants were falling like leaves in autumn? Meanwhile, Samwell Tarly, at the Citadel in Old Town, pored over ancient texts. He found half-forgotten references to the Faceless men in dusty tomes that recounted how no fortress, no matter how mighty, could remain impermeable to them for long. Sam quaked at the knowledge. The realm was about to face its longest winter. The White Walkers loomed, the throne was empty, the High Lords were in disarray, and these assassins, paid by who knows whom, threatened to remove every potential leader who might unite the realm. A rumor took shape, that the purpose was to leave Westeros leaderless when the Great Other arrived from the north. Another rumor claimed it was simply a vengeful spree orchestrated by conspirators who had lost faith in monarchy. The truth remained elusive. But the outcome was certain. If the great houses could not rally behind a single banner, if the last of the claimants fell, the Night King and his hordes would sweep through the realm like a storm of death. In the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy survived a second attempt, though this time the assassin took the form of a drowned man who sabotaged Euron's hold on the Silence. A fire broke out in the hold. Euron, suspicious, confronted the drowned man, who tried to slip a garrote around his neck. Euron fended him off once more, setting the man ablaze in a ring of burning tar. He laughed amid the flames, roaring at the retreating shape of the assassin. Euron's left arm was severely burned, but he refused to lie down and die. He would not let the House of Black and White claim him without a fight. Yet Euron's warlike tenacity did not ensure the survival of his men. Over time, the Ironborn realized their terrifying king was being hunted. Some deserted him, fleeing to distant shores. Others tried to stand firm, but one by one, Euron's officers ended up dead in suspicious circumstances, making Euron's position more precarious. For each unsuccessful direct assault, the Faceless men seemed to cut away at his support structure. Euron's fear grew, turning to rage, fueling cruelty upon any who might be spies. The Iron King became paranoid, half insane, dangerously volatile. Daenerys Targaryen, for her part, finally set sail for Westeros, bringing her remaining dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, along with a fleet of ships bearing Unsullied and Dothraki. She landed in Dorne first, seeking alliances with any Martells or lords still loyal to her family's cause. But upon arrival, she learned that Prince Trystane was dead, and the Sand Snakes had either vanished or been killed in the assassin purge. Dorne was effectively leaderless. Some petty lords tried to hail Daenerys as their queen, but the region was fractious. Frustrated yet determined, Daenerys pressed on toward King's Landing, hoping to claim the throne now that so many obstacles were removed. But she knew the Faceless men would come for her again. She rarely slept without dragons posted at her tent, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness. In the dead of one night, a figure cloaked in black attempted to slip a poison into Daenerys' wine. Drogon stirred, sniffing the air, then bellowed fire at the intruder. Daenerys woke to see a scorched shadow fleeing the inferno. She heard screams from her guards, but found no charred remains. The assassin had escaped. On the march north, Daenerys' route took her through the Stormlands, where scarcely any local lords remained with enough power to resist. On a bleak evening, as rain hammered the canvas of her command tent, another assassin struck. This time in the guise of a wounded Dothraki warrior, the figure stumbled in, requesting an audience with the Khaleesi, claiming he needed the queen's presence to interpret a matter of Dothraki honor. Daenerys, flanked by Missandei and Grey Worm, peered at the man suspiciously. The Faceless men, though cunning, sometimes miscalculated the nuance of a culture. His accent was off, his stance too rigid. Grey Worm whispered caution, but Daenerys nodded for him to let the man approach. The intruder took several halting steps, then unleashed a flurry of darts from a hidden tube. Missandei cried out, a dart burying itself in her upper arm. Grey Worm lunged, shield raised. The assassin hurled a blade at Daenerys. She dove aside, cursing the wet ground. The blade grazed her cheek, but did not bite deep. Her blood, warm and bright, trickled down her face. Rhaegal's roar echoed from outside. The tent tore open, revealing the green-scaled beast's monstrous maw. Fire blasted forward, engulfing the intruder. Though the assassin tried to roll away, the flames were too sudden. Skin crackled. Screams rang. Grey Worm moved in for a mercifully quick killing thrust, but the assassin was already half dead, face melted. Shaken, Daenerys cradled Missandei, who moaned as the poison-laced dart took hold. Desperate, Daenerys called for her healers. Through frantic efforts, they managed to save Missandei from the worst effects of the toxin. But the close call left Daenerys trembling. She had believed her dragons nearly guaranteed her safety, yet the assassins kept coming. She wondered how many would die just so she could keep breathing. While all this bloodshed ravaged the Seven Kingdoms, the North faced a growing threat. Winter was deepening, and reports came of white shadows in the night, of the dead rising. Jon Snow poured all his energy into fortifying the defenses along the neck, seeking allies. But with the realm in chaos, help was scarce. The Knights of the Vale might have aided him, but their leadership was in question. Littlefinger had vanished. The Lannisters were effectively shattered, the Tyrells in disarray, Dorne leaderless. Tyrion Lannister, exiled in Essos, heard rumors that nearly every leader in Westeros was being slaughtered. He also heard that Daenerys was making her move. With cunning hope, he boarded a vessel to sail back, perhaps to rejoin Daenerys' cause. He reasoned that if she lived, she might still become queen. But he did not know if the assassin's contract extended to him as a time Lannister who might have some claim, however tenuous, on Casterly Rock or the monarchy. Still, Tyrion had always been adept at avoiding deadly plots. He kept a low profile, changed ships twice, used every trick to remain a ghost on the seas. The men of the Iron Bank, safe in Braavos, quietly congratulated themselves. They had extracted their debts from some of the great houses. The swirl of chaos might be profitable in the short term. But even they began to wonder if the assassinations had gone too far, if the realm's utter collapse would harm trade and commerce beyond any measure. Some black-robed representative quietly met with the House of Black and White to propose a renegotiation. But once a contract was accepted, the price paid, the House of Black and White traditionally did not yield. The many-faced god had been promised these deaths. They would be delivered. Finally, Daenerys reached King's Landing, or rather the smoldering ruin that remained in the wake of repeated riots and internal strife. She took the city with minimal resistance. The gold cloaks, leaderless, either fled or bent the knee. Houses that had once supported the Iron Throne were too decimated to mount a defense. The people of King's Landing, half-starved and exhausted, looked upon the silver-haired queen with more confusion than jubilation. She set up a provisional rule, placing Grey Worm as captain of the city guard, assigning her advisors to gather support from the surrounding crownlands. On the Iron Throne she sat at last, though it hardly felt triumphant. The Red Keep's halls echoed with ghosts. She felt no sense of glory, only the weight of her wounded shoulder, the scars on her cheek, the knowledge that at any moment a dagger might find her heart. She declared new laws, new reforms, tried to feed the starving. But each night, she expected the Faceless men to strike. She forbade any unknown visitors from entering the throne room. She posted dragons on the walls, their roars echoing across the city. For a time the assassins held back, perhaps rethinking their strategy after so many near misses. Still, Daenerys' hold on the city was precarious. Then an unexpected ally arrived. Tyrion Lannister, who slipped through the gates under a cloak, accompanied by Varys. The spider had re-emerged from the shadows. They both knelt before Daenerys, offering counsel. She eyed Tyrion warily, for she had heard of his family's atrocities. But Tyrion pleaded his case. "My queen, I have no love for what my sister or father did. I have only love for the realm, and I believe you might be its best hope. Let me serve you. Let us rebuild this broken land." Daenerys considered. She had few capable advisors left. Missandei still recovered from the poison. Grey Worm was no politician, and Jorah Mormont was loyal but short on cunning. She accepted Tyrion's counsel. Meanwhile, Varys arranged a network of whispers to ferret out potential assassins. "The Faceless men are fearsome," he admitted, "but they cannot be everywhere at once. We must watch closely for any sign of infiltration." And so, a precarious vigilance enveloped the Red Keep. Daenerys' rule began in a city half-deserted, half-broken, and on the brink of winter. She dispatched ravens north to Jon Snow, proposing an alliance. Her armies and dragons could help repel the White Walkers if he would bend the knee. Jon, after grave deliberation, agreed to meet, for the threat of the undead overshadowed all else. He traveled south with Davos Seaworth and a handful of trusted men, evading potential assassins along the way. Their meeting in the throne room was tense. Daenerys demanded fealty. Jon insisted his priority was the White Walkers, not Southern politics. Tyrion tried to mediate, as did Davos. In the midst of negotiations, the wind whistled through the shattered windows, an ominous note. But at least these two living leaders were speaking. Perhaps they could unite at last. Yet fate did not kindly allow them peace. While they argued, a new threat manifested in the Red Keep's halls. A man in the robe of a maester, who had spent weeks carefully establishing credibility among the palace staff, appearing helpful, performing menial tasks. He drifted through the corridors, heading for the throne room. In his satchel lay a small crossbow, collapsible, with a single bolt coated in a lethal poison. He had a vantage point planned from a corridor window overlooking the dais. One bolt to the heart of the Dragon Queen, and possibly a second bolt for the king in the north. 2 claimants, 2 kills. The moment arrived. Daenerys stood, temper flaring as she demanded Jon's pledge. Jon glowered, refusing. Davos tried to calm him. Tyrion interjected, cautioning moderation. Just then, a flicker of movement from above and behind. Varys, standing near a pillar, saw the silhouette of the maester aiming a crossbow. He shouted a warning, but the bolt was already flying. Daenerys moved instinctively, trying to duck. The arrow buzzed past her ear, narrowly missing. It ripped through Tyrion's shoulder instead. The Lannister let out a cry and collapsed. The assassin hissed in frustration, reloading. Jon, quick to react, dove toward Daenerys, pushing her aside. Another bolt twanged from the crossbow, burying itself in the throne's metal frame with a clang. Guards rushed in. The assassin tried to vanish, but Varys had seen his face. He directed the guards to intercept. The corridors erupted in a chase. The assassin flung aside his maester's robe, revealing lithe black attire. He hurled a small canister behind him. Some sort of Braavosi smoke bomb, and for a moment the passage filled with choking fog. By the time the guards cleared it, the corridor was empty. In the throne room, Tyrion bled from a deep shoulder wound. Daenerys knelt beside him, trembling with a mixture of relief and terror. Jon stood, hand on his sword, scanning for any sign of danger. The atmosphere felt suffocating, as if the entire kingdom was on the brink of collapse, besieged from within. They carried Tyrion to the maesters. The bolt's poison ate at his flesh. He lapsed in and out of fever dreams, muttering half-coherent regrets. Daenerys raged, calling for an immediate crackdown on any suspicious figure in King's Landing. Jon stood silent, a sense of doom gnawing at him. He realized how precarious everything was. If Daenerys died, the last best chance for unity might die with her. If Jon died, the North might never unite with the South. And all the while winter marched on, unstoppable. Desperate times called for desperate alliances. Daenerys, once more, demanded Jon's fealty. He refused to bend the knee, but he offered a suggestion: to wed, uniting Targaryen and Stark, thus forging a single leadership. The idea stunned Daenerys. She hesitated, suspicious. "We are strangers," he said, "and possibly kin if rumors of your birth are true." Jon looked grim. "I don't know if the rumors are true, but we need unity more than ever. If we stand apart, the Faceless men will pick us off eventually, and the dead will devour whatever remains." "Then ciao." Daenerys studied him. She felt the burden of the crown on her brow. She glanced at Tyrion, pale and trembling, the man who'd risked his life to see her reign. "Perhaps it is time for a new way," she murmured. "Very well, Jon Snow. Let us try to unite. For the good of the realm." Before a wedding could be arranged, however, word reached King's Landing that the others had crossed the wall, using some dark sorcery to bring it down. The North was embroiled in terror, White Walkers and Whites streaming south. If that horror was not enough, new rumors suggested the Faceless men had begun assassinating Northern lords, sowing confusion so no unified defense could form. The Umbers were leaderless, the Karstarks in disarray, the Manderleys paralyzed by fear. John cursed. "We have no time, Your Grace. If the wall has truly fallen, we must gather our forces at once and meet the threat. We can plan a wedding later, but for now, we fight or we die." Daenerys nodded, steel in her eyes. "I will call my banners, what remains of them. We will gather at Harrenhal. The fortress is large enough for a host, and it's more central. From there, we march north." Menti Samuel. They set the plan in motion. Daenerys soared north on Drogon, accompanied by Rhaegal. Viserion stayed behind to guard King's Landing with a portion of her unsullied, for fear that if she left the city defenseless, the assassins or any opportunistic lords might claim it. Jon, leading a contingent of northern men, parted ways to rally what houses he could. But the Faceless men followed them. At every encampment, there were suspicious accidents, sabotage, guards found dead in their tents. Daenerys took to sleeping near Drogon, using the dragon's watchful presence as her best shield. Jon rarely slept, consumed by the crisis. Now that the others were real and present, the realm needed living leaders more than ever. Yet the House of Black and White was close behind, collecting every name they had accepted coin for. Time was running out. Winter's storms raged. The armies trudged northward, morale ragged. At Harrenhal, once a place of ill omen, they established a base. The ancient fortress with its melted towers loomed like a cursed behemoth over the bleak landscape. Yet here, Daenerys and Jon intended to muster the final stand. Arya Stark arrived unannounced one evening, slipping past the watchers with ease. She revealed herself to Jon in a private moment, her eyes hard with the memory of her training, her voice quiet with the burdens she carried. Jon embraced her, tears of relief in his eyes, yet she seemed changed, an edge to her he could scarcely understand. She told him about the House of Black and White, how they might be stopped if they were confronted by one who knew their secrets. "Do you think you can do that?" Jon asked, uncertain. "I have to try," Arya said. "I won't let them kill you or Daenerys or anyone else I love. This has to end." And so, in the corridors of Harrenhal, Arya waited for the assassins she knew would come. She did not know what face they would wear, but she understood their methods. She posted decoys, false opportunities, placed rumor that Daenerys would be alone in the Godswood at twilight, or that Jon would be training men in a lesser courtyard. She orchestrated potential kills like a fisherman setting baited lines. And she waited, hidden in the black recesses of the fortress. At last, a figure emerged near the old tower. A guardsman too silent, too smooth in step. Arya watched from the shadows, heart pounding. The figure advanced toward a side entrance that led to Daenerys' temporary chambers. Arya slipped behind them, dagger in hand. The figure paused, as if sensing the presence of another ghost in the gloom. A swirl of motion. The assassin spun, brandishing a Braavosi blade. Arya recognized the stance. This was no amateur. They attacked each other in a rush. Steel clashed, echoing off the stone walls. Arya's smaller blade moved in lightning arcs, taught by the lessons of the Faceless men themselves. The assassin responded with equal skill, weaving illusions, feints, spins. Sparks danced. Arya felt the unstoppable momentum of fate pushing them both. She glimpsed the assassin's eyes, tried to decipher who it might be under that borrowed face. Was it someone she'd once known from the house? A sudden lunge caught Arya's arm, slicing her sleeve. Blood trickled, but she ignored the pain, pivoting nimbly. She feigned to stumble, letting the assassin move in for the kill. At the last second, she twisted, using the maneuver the waif had used on her countless times in training. Her dagger sank into the assassin's side. A hiss of shock escaped them. Arya pressed in further, feeling the life drain from the assassin's body. The face trembled, shifting as the assassin sank to the floor. For an instant, Arya thought she recognized the waif's visage, or the kindly man, or a swirl of countless faces. Finally, it settled into something featureless, as though the skin were half-melted wax. The assassin's lips parted in a final breath. Arya stared, chest heaving, tears burning in her eyes. She had spilled the blood of her old teachers, truly severing her ties to the house of Black and White. She could only hope this kill would send a message: you are not omnipotent here. Elsewhere in Harrenhal that night, a second assassin tried to get close to John, disguised as a man-at-arms, but was discovered and subdued by Tormund Giantsbane and a troop of wildlings. The assassin's attempt was clumsy. Perhaps the main effort had been focused on Daenerys, or perhaps the house of Black and White was stretched thin. The battered killer ended up pinned under Tormund's bulk, unable to flee or change faces in time. The wildlings ended the intruder without mercy. At dawn, Daenerys convened a somber gathering. She looked upon the two faceless corpses, one slain by Arya, the other by the wildlings. "We've won a small victory," she said, voice echoing in Harrenhal's hall. "But the house of Black and White will not relent." Jon, tired eyes ringed with shadows, nodded. "We must take the fight to them, or we must find a way to end this contract." Varys spoke up. "In Braavos, the masters of coin might negotiate, or there might be some hidden clause. But such hope is slim." Missandei, her arm still bandaged, said softly, "A contract can sometimes be amended if the client is found and forced to withdraw payment. But we do not know who paid for this." Daenerys' hands curled into fists. "We have no time to chase a phantom while the others march on us." Arya, face pale but determined, said, "Let me go to Braavos. I know their ways. If there is any chance to sever the contract, I can try. You focus on the war for the living. If you die, all is lost." "Then..." Jon tried to protest, but Daenerys silenced him. She looked at Arya's fierce expression and understood the Stark girl would not be dissuaded. "Go," Daenerys said. "Do what you must, and hurry." With that, Arya departed, slipping away once more into the chaos of the realm. Jon and Daenerys resumed their gathering of forces, preparing to face the White Walkers as they advanced relentlessly south. No one could guess how many assassins still lurked in the shadows, how many times a dagger might yet flash in the night. But the fates of the realms would-be monarchs were on a collision course, with a winter that threatened to devour them all. With each passing day, the snows crept further, covering fields and roads. Reports came of entire villages wiped out by the undead. Refugees streamed south, seeking shelter in Harrenhal or beyond. Daenerys set up watch posts, patrolled by Dothraki riders. Jon oversaw the training of as many men as could hold a sword, forging a ragtag army from northerners, crownlanders, and freed slaves. Dragons soared overhead, a brief flicker of hope. On one fateful night, while the winter moon hung like a pale lantern in the sky, the dead arrived at the outskirts of Harrenhal. White Walkers rode undead horses, white hordes shambled across the blasted plain. A battle erupted under the dying moonlight. Daenerys unleashed Drogon's fire, scorching rows of whites. Rhaegal harried the flanks, unleashing plumes of flame. Warriors clashed steel with rotted flesh. Jon led a desperate charge, Longclaw's Valyrian steel shining each time it clove a White Walker. Amid the chaos, a slender figure slipped through the lines, heading for Daenerys at the rear. Another assassin, or so it seemed. But Grey Worm intercepted the intruder, battling fiercely. The intruder managed to nick Grey Worm's side with a dagger before a random wight crashed into them. The melee swallowed them both. Daenerys, hearing the clash, turned just in time to see another shape emerging from the gloom. Raising a short bow, she gasped, but Jorah Mormont lunged in front of her, taking an arrow to the chest with a guttural cry. The arrow was clearly tipped with something vile, for Jorah's face twisted in agony. He fell to his knees. Daenerys screamed, anger and grief fueling her. She urged Drogon to spew fire. The assassin leaped aside, half consumed by the blaze, shrieking as they died. With the assassin's death, Jorah crawled to Daenerys, blood staining his tunic. She cradled him, tears running down her cheeks. "My queen," he murmured. "Live. You must live." Then his eyes fluttered shut. Daenerys howled in anguish, her heartbreak echoing across the battlefield, lost amid the roars of dragons and the screams of whites. Finally, dawn broke, revealing piles of smoldering corpses, both undead and living. Harrenhal's defenders had beaten back the first assault, but at a terrible price. Bodies lay strewn across the blood-soaked ground. Among the dead, Daenerys recognized the twisted remains of at least 2 more faceless men who had tried to slip in as wounded soldiers. Perhaps they had hoped the chaos would mask them. They had found only death instead. But the tide of the undead was relentless, and the assassin's attempts on Daenerys' life continued. She seemed to be living on borrowed time, each sunrise a miracle. Jon fought valiantly at her side, both of them forging a unity that might have saved the realm if only they had more time. In Braavos, Arya Stark finally reached the House of Black and White under cover of night. She confronted the kindly man in the Hall of Faces, her own face concealed by a black cowl. "I come to offer a name," she said, voice trembling with carefully contained fury. "Arya Stark. If you end the contract on my brother and Daenerys Targaryen, you may kill Arya Stark." "Then?" The kindly man stood silent, as though unperturbed. "You think we have not already claimed Arya Stark? A name can be offered only once." "Then name your price," Arya insisted, stepping closer. "There must be a way. You are men of coin. The many-faced god is owed these deaths, but what if he has offered others?" The kindly man's eyes glimmered in the candlelight. "The contract was made in secret, for the highest sums. Only the client can dissolve it." "Then who is the client?" Arya demanded, though she guessed the house would never reveal that. Silence stretched, as cold as the wind outside. Then the kindly man said, "You betray our ways by returning here. You abandoned your path. You are no one, and yet you cling to a name. For that, the many-faced god is owed a debt. One life or many. You cannot bargain with that which is already promised." Arya trembled, feeling the flickering threat. All around her, the columns of faces seemed to stare. She realized she would get no help here. The House of Black and White would not yield the contract. She had risked everything for a hopeless gambit. She fled into the Braavosi night, pursued by silent novices. She eluded them by diving into a canal, swimming through the frigid water. Eventually, she escaped to a small sloop that smuggled her out of the city. She failed to break the contract, leaving her uncertain whether her presence had only inflamed the house's resolve. As Arya made her perilous journey back, the final confrontation in Westeros loomed. The White Walkers pressed south, unstoppable. One by one, the living forces fell back, losing ground despite the dragon's might. Daenerys realized the kingdom was on the brink of annihilation. Even if she survived the Faceless Men, would she survive the Night King's wrath? Yet in their final stand near the God's Eye, Daenerys and Jon managed to rally the remnants of the realm. The Tarly forces, father and brother gone, rallied under Sam's distant cousin. The Freys, decimated by their own internal betrayals, contributed a token force. The Vale Knights, some led by a traveling Littlefinger and Sansa, arrived in the nick of time. Euron Greyjoy, battered but still defiant, unleashed his fleet in the Blackwater Bay to blockade any approach from the sea, though that meant little to the undead. The penultimate night saw a swirl of snow and ice, and the White Walkers attacked. Dragonfire lit the darkness. Valyrian steel clashed with ice spears. The living fought with the desperation of cornered beasts. Daenerys, perched on Drogon, rained fire from above, but a spear of ice hurled by the Night King wounded Rhaegal, sending the green dragon crashing to the ground in a shriek of agony. Jon ran to defend the wounded beast, slashing Whites left and right. In the chaos, a shadow darted behind Daenerys' lines. The last, and perhaps greatest, assassin from the House of Black and White had come. Taking the face of a slain Dothraki blood rider, this killer crept toward the Targaryen queen. Holding a Valyrian steel dagger, they used the swirling snow for cover, each step timed with the roars of battle. They drew closer, closer, until Daenerys' flank lay exposed. And then, a blur of gray and white fur slammed into them. Ghost, Jones' Deerwolf, tearing at the assassin's wrist. The dagger fell, clattering. The assassin snarled, grappling with the vicious wolf. Another shape appeared, Arya Stark, pale with exhaustion, having raced from the fringes of the battlefield. She wasted no words, no breath. She launched herself at the entangled assassin, her own dagger drawn, and in a single lethal motion, plunged it into their neck. Blood spurted, staining the white snow. Ghost growled, but Arya pulled him away. The assassin spasmed, features going slack. A final breath rattled out. The assassin stilled. Arya stared, panting, holding Ghost back. She glanced up at Daenerys, who gazed down from Drogon's saddle, eyes wide with shock and gratitude. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The last strike from the House of Black and White had failed. Moments later, a thunderous crack drew everyone's attention. The Night King had arrived in the midst of the battlefield, aiming another ice spear at Drogon. Jon flung himself forward, trying to distract the ancient terror. The white hordes converged. Daenerys screamed for her dragon to take flight. Drogon soared upward, unleashing a torrent of flame. The Night King stood amid the inferno, unwavering. Jon roared a challenge, brandishing Longclaw. The final stand would decide the fate of the living. The House of Black and White had done its utmost to kill every contender, every hope of unification. Many had indeed fallen, leaving the realm mostly leaderless. Yet here, in the swirling heart of winter, a few still lived: Daenerys Targaryen, Jon Snow, Arya Stark, and the battered remnants of the living armies. Whether they would triumph over the darkness or vanish in the swirl of snow and ash remained to be seen. But across the sea, in Braavos, the House of Black and White quietly counted its spoils. The coins had been paid, the names claimed one by one. Fewer than a handful of the original targets remained: the unburnt queen, the reborn bastard king, the mockingbird, the crow's eye. The house took pride in its near completion of the contract, unstoppable as winter itself. They had reaped more highborn lives than any plague in living memory, delivering them all to the many-faced god who had initiated the contract. Some say it was a shadow council from the east, determined to keep Westeros in turmoil. Others claim it was the Iron Bank, quietly removing all risk of unpaid debts. Still others believe a mysterious force, wishing to aid the White Walkers, had financed the destruction of mortal leadership. The truth remained elusive, shrouded in the black shadows of the Braavosi Temple. And so, with the land sundered, the Iron Throne effectively empty despite Daenerys' technical occupancy, and the dead advancing, Westeros stood on the brink of annihilation. Had the House of Black and White killed the realm as surely as if they'd swung the sword themselves? Or would the final surviving claimants rally together, spurred by the knowledge that only unity could defeat the oncoming tide? As day broke over the field near the God's Eye, the battered sunrise revealed the living locked in combat with the dead. Whether the light of hope would outlast the darkness was a question none could answer. And high above, crows circled on icy winds, awaiting whatever feast might remain, while the hidden watchers of the Faceless men prepared for whatever might come next. If the many-faced god demanded more lives, they would be taken. The old order of kings and queens was already shattered, and if winter triumphed, the assassin's work would stand as one of the final nails in the coffin of a once proud realm. In that bleak dawn, Daenerys and Jon took what little solace they could in each other's presence. They shared a look of determination, remembering the cost already paid in blood, and raised their banners one last time. For though the Faceless men had done their worst, the greatest enemy still waited before them, and the living had only one choice: to stand together or perish in ice and death. Thus the story teetered on a precipice, the Iron Throne all but a grave marker for the shattered lines of succession. The House of Black and White had played its part, removing the claimants with methodical precision. Only a handful survived by wit, skill, or pure luck. In the end, it was no longer about who would rule, but whether anyone would live long enough to try. In the brittle silence after the night's carnage, Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow stood together on the ramparts of Harrenhal, surveying the funeral pyres that flickered against the dawn sky. Bodies of both the dead and the undead were being gathered for burning in the courtyard below, acrid smoke curling up in dark plumes. Stains of blood and soot streaked Daenerys' cheeks. She had neither the time nor the strength to wash away the horror of the previous night. Her silver-gold hair was matted with ash. Her eyes red from unshed tears. She still wore her torn battle leathers, singed in places by dragon flame and spattered with gore. Next to her, Jon braced both hands on the blackened stone crenellation, long claws pommel visible over his shoulder. The leather thong binding his hair had snapped at some point in the battle, leaving his dark locks tangled around his grim, pale face. No words passed between them for a long while. Behind them, even in the partial shelter of Harrenhal's melted towers, a chill wind hissed, promising that winter's heart had only begun to tighten its grip. At last, Daenerys broke the quiet. "We lost so many," she said, her voice raw. "Jorah. Grey Worm is wounded too. The Dothraki lost at least half their numbers. The Unsullied, fewer than before. And yet, the dead will keep coming. More than we can count." "Then thou what?" Jon nodded, closing his eyes against the sorrow that welled in him. "We barely survived the first wave, and that was with both dragons in flight. If the others attack us here again, in greater numbers, Harrenhal won't hold. The walls are strong, but the fortress is vast, riddled with weaknesses." He paused, swallowing hard. "We need to move quickly if we mean to hold them back before they reach the populous south. I never thought I'd say that King's Landing might be safer, but at least the walls there are thick, and a harbor exists for supplies." "Damn they." Daenerys wanted to close her eyes and vanish into the grief that tore at her chest whenever she thought of Jorah dying in her arms, his body now consumed by the flames in the courtyard. But she steadied herself. She was queen, or so she strove to be. This was not the time for tears, nor for weakness. "King's Landing," she said numbly. "Is it even worth defending? The people there have been ravaged by famine, by riots, by the assassinations. Half the city might riot again if we bring the armies in." "Ben." Jon turned to face her. His eyes were haunted. "I know. But with the realm's leaders dead or scattered, we have fewer fortresses we can rely on. Winterfell was our best hope to hold the line, but the wall has been breached, and the lands between here and the north are overrun. When be trying to hold a ruin in the path of a storm, or we try to gather everyone in King's Landing, the last seat that might unite enough men in Landing, the last seat that might unite enough men and resources to hold until spring." Daenerys' lips tightened. If the White Walkers were not stopped, there might be no spring. Then we should gather what remains of our armies, muster any southern lords who still live, prepare for a final stand. Or end this war with one stroke. My dragons wounded him last night. "You did all you could," Jon said softly, stepping closer. "If it weren't for your dragons, we would have been overrun entirely. The rest of us fought as hard as we could, but without dragonfire, the Whites would have taken the courtyard in the first hour." He pressed his lips together, as though gathering the nerve to speak of something else. "We have to keep moving. Staying here invites disaster." A moan from below, where the wounded were being carried to makeshift tents, punctured their conversation. Daenerys glanced down and saw a line of stretchers bearing men missing limbs, faces pale with shock. She noticed Grey Worm on one of them, unconscious, his shoulder wrapped in thick, hastily tied bandages. Missandei hovered beside him, her bandaged arm in a sling, refusing to leave his side. Watching them stirred the queen's guilt anew. So many had followed her to these foreign lands, pledging their lives, and she feared she was failing them. Before she could dwell on that, footsteps approached from within the tower. Tyrion Lannister limped up behind them, his face gaunt and lined with pain. He still hadn't fully recovered from the crossbow bolt he'd taken in King's Landing. A maester's poultice pressed against the wound at his shoulder, and he cradled his injured arm protectively. Yet his mind seemed as sharp as ever, for even in pain, Tyrion's eyes gleamed with anxious calculation. "My queen," he said, bowing his head. Then, addressing Jon, We've begun to take stock. It's worse than we hoped, better than we feared. We might muster a few thousand fit to march in another day or two. John nodded briskly. Then we march. The others won't tarry. Daenerys tore her gaze from the pyres. We march south, or stay and make a stand. Tyrion took a moment to answer, but his tone was firm when he did. I've conferred with the best tactical minds we still have. Sir Davos, the remnants of the Stormlanders, Tormund Giantsbane. Even Sansa and Littlefinger had input. By the time the others gather fully, we'll be lost if we don't meet them on open ground, or else retreat behind a fortress with a workable supply line. Harrenhal is enormous, yes, but it's also cursed, partially ruined, and cut off from the seas. With winter's storms and the roving white hordes, we'd soon run out of provisions. Our best hope is to go somewhere we can be resupplied by ship. King's Landing remains the only city with a harbor large enough to sustain an army of this size. Daenerys hated the idea of returning to the capital so soon. She had only recently left it in the hands of a caretaker force. Viserion among them, half her unsullied, and a few loyal men from the Reach who had sworn themselves to her. Now she risked leading an exhausted, battered host into that city. But Tyrion's logic was sound. The capital was still the largest population center, a seat from which to consolidate. If the people rose against her, that would be another war. But perhaps fear of the dead would unify them, if only for a time. Then prepare them to march, Daenerys said, voice cold. We'll leave by tomorrow, at the latest. If the living remain scattered, we die. Jon let out a breath. Agreed. But we also have to worry about the assassins. The Faceless men might strike while we're on the road. Harrenhal's labyrinthine corridors at least gave us some security. The open road will not. A flash of unease twisted Daenerys' expression. She recalled the attempts on her life. How only the intervention of her dragons and her loyal companions had saved her from certain death. So be it, she said. The Faceless men will try again, but at least we have Arya now. She seems our best defense against them. Tyrion shifted awkwardly, grunting with discomfort at the wound in his shoulder. Speaking of Arya, she's returned from Braavos with ill news. The House of Black and White will not rescind the contract. They claim it's final, paid in blood and gold. We've no choice but to remain vigilant. Oh. At the mention of Arya, Jon glanced over his shoulder. He couldn't see her from the rampart, but he knew she was inside Harrenhal's great hall, sharpening her blades or perhaps speaking with Sansa. Though she'd grown from the little girl he remembered, he felt a pang of warmth each time he thought of her still being alive, still fighting to protect their family. She had saved Daenerys from the last assassin, ensuring the fragile alliance between Queen and King in the north endured. That, at least, felt like a miracle in a land of misery. A raven soared overhead, cawing at the pyres below, as though scolding the living for their meager attempts to bring order to this dreadful dawn. Jon exhaled, turning from the rampart. Then we'll gather all who can march, all who can ride. We leave for King's Landing with all haste. Best to leave only a token presence here. To watch for stragglers. The rest of us must keep ahead of the White Walkers. Or at least not fall behind them. Daenerys nodded and allowed herself one last glance at the flickering funeral fires. The smell of burning flesh stung her nostrils. She turned away. So be it. She murmured, and walked with brisk steps back into the ruined tower, Jon and Tyrion trailing behind. They descended the worn steps into Harrenhal's lower chambers. The great hall was a wreck, broken furniture pushed against the walls, cots set up for the injured, half the rafters scorched by dragon flame in an earlier skirmish. Soldiers and refugees huddled in small groups, fear etched into their faces. The hush was broken only by occasional groans from the wounded, or the murmured prayers of a red-robed priest who had taken shelter with them. Daenerys paused as she stepped in, scanning the hall for Missandei or any sign of Arya. Instead, her eyes fixed on Sansa Stark, who stood on the far side of the room, speaking quietly with Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger. Sansa looked up and caught Daenerys' eye. An instant later, she excused herself and crossed the hall, Baelish following. Daenerys felt tension coil in her gut. Her experiences with northern politics had never been comfortable, and Sansa's history with her was complicated at best. Yet they needed each other. Sansa had proven invaluable in organizing supplies, in rallying terrified refugees. For all her soft-spoken manner, the Lady of Winterfell had grown adept at leadership. "Your Grace," Sansa said, dipping her head. Her auburn hair was braided close to her scalp, an eminently practical style for traveling. Shadows lingered under her eyes, but she spoke calmly. "We hear we're to march soon?" "Yes," Daenerys answered. "We cannot remain here. There will be no second stand at Harrenhal. The plan is to march for King's Landing and unify what remains of the realm there." "Nenarwinder." Sansa's gaze flicked to Jon, who stood close by. "We'll need to ensure enough rations for the journey. The roads are thick with refugees, and food is scarce even in the Crown Lands. I've done what I can, but men can't march on empty bellies." Daenerys nodded once. "Tyrion will see to coordinating supply lines with the ships we have on the Blackwater. You and your men can help oversee the distribution. The city still has storehouses that we can—" Littlefinger cleared his throat gently, stepping into the conversation. "Your Grace, if I might add, I've had some ravens dispatched to the Vale. Lord Royce yet retains some measure of forces in the Eyrie. They might be persuaded to sail south and join us in King's Landing, if they can gather ships quickly. And if not, they can bring provisions on horseback to the Rosby Road. With your permission, I'd like to coordinate with them." Daenerys' eyes narrowed. She knew all too well the rumors about Baelish, how cunning he was, how dangerous. He had already survived one faceless man's attack by outmaneuvering the assassin. That gave him a certain intangible power, as if the House of Black and White itself had failed to remove him from the board. She did not trust him, but she also needed every mind that could keep the realm from collapsing. "Fine," she said. "Do so, but do not vanish again without telling someone." A ghost of a smile touched Baelish's lips, as though he recognized the unspoken scorn, but did not mind. "Of course, Your Grace. I serve at your pleasure." "Nah." With that, he dipped his head and slipped away, heading toward a cluster of scribes in the corner. Sansa watched him go, tension in her shoulders. Daenerys recognized the younger woman's mistrust. Perhaps they shared that in common. "I'll gather our men," Sansa said quietly, turning back to Daenerys. "We'll be ready." Jon gave his sister a quick, warm nod. Sansa's gaze softened, and for a moment, Daenerys glimpsed the bond between them, the true affection that survived all the betrayals and wars. Then Sansa was gone, moving with brisk purpose among the cots. Daenerys and Jon conferred with Tyrion a while longer, finalizing the day's orders. Soldiers were to gather all serviceable weapons, including dragonglass daggers and arrowheads. The battered blacksmithing tools at Harrenhal would be put to use for a final day of forging. Refugees who could wield pikes or spears were drafted into a ragtag militia, given the barest training. The rest, children, the elderly, the gravely wounded, would be escorted in wagons behind the main host, though no one believed that truly safe. When the White Walkers pressed forward again, no place would be safe. But at least traveling with the army offered some hope of protection. Amid the swirl of frantic preparation, Arya Stark reappeared, slipping out of the corridor that led to the fortress' older wings. A fresh slash cut across her right forearm, bound tight with a bit of cloth. She approached Daenerys and Jon, glancing behind her as though checking for pursuit. "I found more of them," she said under her breath, face pale. "Faceless men, or at least novices, in the old servants' quarters. I counted 2 bodies. They must have turned on each other, or maybe the illusions failed them. It looks like they were disguised as soldiers from the Vale. One slit the other's throat, though I can't imagine why." "No." Daenerys' heart lurched. "They're at each other's throats now." Arya shrugged, her eyes dark with memory. "Sometimes, the House of Black and White is large but not infinite. They're overextended, chasing down every last name on their list. Perhaps these novices were in competition or disagreement. Or perhaps it was a test. Either way, I suppose it's one less assassin to worry about." Jon shook his head, a scowl twisting his mouth. "Or we worry more." since that means at least one remains, and we don't know where. Thank you for telling us. He paused, looking over Arya's injuries, that subtle hunched posture that came from constant vigilance. We ride for King's Landing at dawn. Do you have a plan on how to protect Daenerys, and the rest of us, on the road? Arya pursed her lips. I'll do what I can. I've taught some of our best scouts a few of the detection tricks I learned in Bravos. It won't stop a truly skilled assassin, but it might unmask novices. Keep an eye on each other. Simple things. If someone is never seen eating, or if they avoid speaking in extended sentences, it can be a tell. She sounded uncertain, as if aware that the House of Black and White had many more cunning methods. We'll keep watch in shifts. Ghost can sense them too. He's grown adept at sniffing out the smell of that face-changing magic somehow. Daenerys nodded. She remembered how Ghost's intervention had saved her life in the last battle. The dire wolf's keen instincts were as valuable as any soldier. Thank you, she said, forcing some warmth into her tone. We need you more than ever, Arya Stark. Arya dipped her head, but her posture remained taut, as if she were always prepared to draw a blade. I'll organize the scouts, she said, and departed with swift, silent steps. In the hours that followed, Harrenhal swarmed like a kicked anthill. Soldiers tightened armor straps, blacksmiths hammered out new arrowheads, refugees scrambled for space on wagons. By midday, a few battered knights from the Westerlands arrived, survivors from minor houses once loyal to the Lannisters. They had nowhere else to go, so they pledged service to Daenerys. She accepted warily, mindful that for each new ally, there was a new risk of infiltration. Tormund Giantsbane tried to keep the wildlings from brawling with the Southerners in the cramped courtyards. Brienne of Tarth, who had turned up some days earlier with a small band of loyal knights, walked the battlements, stoic and vigilant. Varys the Spider had emerged from the labyrinth of Harrenhal with fresh intelligence about the White Walkers' progress. They were slow but ceaseless, a vast legion of the dead traveling in the wake of the Night King, covering miles of countryside each day. Villages emptied, their inhabitants either fleeing or rising again as whites. The knowledge weighed on everyone's hearts. Night fell grimly, and Daenerys insisted on a final war council in the Great Hall. Torches lined the walls, illuminating the battered chamber with flickering golden light. She sat at the center of a rough-hewn table, Jon on her right, Tyrion on her left. Sansa, Arya, Davos, Tormund, Brienne, and a handful of others crowded around. Missandei stood behind Daenerys, quiet but resolute, despite her bandaged arm. Grey Worm was too weak from his injuries to attend, so a scarred, unsullied captain represented his interests. Baelish lingered at the edges, silent and watchful, occasionally leaning in to whisper suggestions to Sansa or any other lord who would listen. The mood was tense, the air thick with the stale smell of sweat and fear. Tyrion cleared his throat to begin. We have determined that at first light, the main host will depart Harrenhal. The Targaryen forces, what remains of the Dothraki and Unsullied, will lead, with the Northerners following. The Vale Knights will form the rear guard. Lady Brienne and her knights will patrol the flanks. We'll move as swiftly as possible, hoping to outrun the slower pace of the Whites. If we're lucky, we may reach the roads leading south to the Crownlands without encountering the bulk of the enemy. Nendawa. Davos grimaced. And if we're unlucky? Tyrion rubbed his bandaged shoulder. Then we fight. But we'll have open ground, which suits our cavalry and dragons. Better than being penned in within these walls. Supplies remain the critical issue. The fewer days we're on the road, the better. I'm urging no more than a brief midday stop each day for rest. If we push the pace, we might reach the outskirts of King's Landing in just under a fortnight. Now, Jon leaned forward, expression resolute. We have to move quickly. Every day we linger, more settlements to the north are destroyed. The dead swell their ranks with every life they take. By the time they reach us again, they'll be that much stronger. He paused, turning his gaze on Daenerys. Will you fly ahead on Drogon? Try to clear the path. Daenerys exhaled slowly. If Drogon grows too weary, or if we're attacked in mid-flight, we risk losing him. I can attempt scouting runs, but we cannot separate entirely from the host. And Rhaegal is wounded, though alive. He can still fly short distances, but he's not at full strength. Perhaps I can have him remain on the ground, leading the Dothraki to burn whites, while Drogon and I scout overhead. And what of Viserion and King's Landing? Someone asked softly. It was a minor knight from the Reach, voice quivering with a mixture of hope and awe at the mention of dragons. He's still there, yes? Daenerys thought of the pale, gold-hued dragon who had been left behind to secure the capital. Yes. He'll be waiting. If all goes well, we'll have 3 dragons to defend the city. That might be enough to keep the White Walkers at bay. For a while. Brienne cleared her throat. I stand ready to defend the Queen on the march. I suggest we send outriders well ahead of us. Tormund has many wildlings who know how to move swiftly and silently. Arya might help them detect any infiltration. Tormund grinned, revealing teeth that had seen too many winters. Aye. We'll watch your front. We'll watch your back, too. These dead men and these face-changers won't catch us napping. Arya flicked her eyes to him, an unreadable expression on her face. She said nothing, but Daenerys sensed gratitude for the willingness of these fierce people to stand guard. At the conclusion of the council, Daenerys rose to her feet. Then rest if you can. We ride at first light. The attendees dispersed, some exchanging hushed words, others stumbling away in grim silence. Jon lingered by the table, running a hand over the cracked wood. You should rest too, he said gently to Daenerys. You've been up all night. And last night's battle. She shook her head, exhaustion etched into her bones. I'll try, but I doubt I'll sleep. If you see me drifting off in the saddle tomorrow, be sure to wake me. Jon managed a half-smile. We keep each other alive. That's the bargain. She forced a matching smile, though tears burned at the corners of her eyes. The world felt so fragile. Every morning might be their last. The House of Black and White might dispatch another wave of killers. The White Walkers might descend at any moment. Yet in Jon's presence, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Hope that maybe the living could endure, that maybe their alliance could hold. He touched her arm gently, then turned and headed off to check on the men from the north. Daenerys stood alone, for a moment, in the dying torchlight, hearing distant moans of the wounded, the crackle of pyres, the clank of metal from the blacksmith's corner. She felt every loss like a fresh wound, but she inhaled and reminded herself, a queen does not falter. She found a quiet corner of the tower to rest, Missandei close by, braiding Daenerys' disheveled hair while half asleep. When dawn arrived, Daenerys rose, strapped on her worn riding leathers, and descended to the courtyard. The army had formed ranks in the misty half-light, steam rising from the horses' nostrils. The Dothraki gathered with grim determination, their customary whoops and war cries subdued in the face of so much death and exhaustion. The Unsullied, fewer than before, stood at silent attention, battered shields at their sides, plumes of frost forming when they breathed. Northern spearmen formed up behind them, led by Davos and Tormund, while the Vale Knights and Sansa's archers prepared to ride rearguard. Small folk refugees huddled in lines of wagons, their expressions resigned or terrified. And overshadowing them all was Drogon, perched on a fractured rampart, smoke drifting from his nostrils as he gazed across the gathering. Daenerys' heart clenched at the sight of her battered host. This was all that stood between the living realm and endless night. Yet it would have to do. She mounted a white mare brought for her, nodding to the unsullied captain who handed her the reins. She rode through the lines, exchanging firm glances with the men. Many looked to her with a spark of admiration, or at least desperate faith, as though she might somehow conjure victory out of certain doom. Jon joined her, mounted on a stout northern horse. Ghost padded at his side, the great direwolf's red eyes scanning the crowd for threats. Arya rode a slim courser near the front, bow slung across her back, always watchful. Sansa and Baelish took positions behind the wagons, ensuring no one was left behind. Tyrion had elected to ride in a covered wagon with a handful of maesters, for his wound still pained him too severely to endure long hours in the saddle. A horn blew once. The gates of Harrenhal creaked open, heavy chains rattling. The army began to move, trudging out from the courtyard, across the ruined drawbridge, into the wide expanse of scorched fields that flanked the castle. Thin patches of snow covered the ground, and the wind stung exposed skin like needles. Daenerys urged her mare forward, Drogon flapping overhead in slow arcs. She glanced back once at the looming ruin of Harrenhal, pillars of smoke still rising from the previous night's pyres. Perhaps no castle in Westeros better symbolized the folly of men trying to become gods. They pressed on. For 2 days, they traveled across bleak countryside, encountering only the occasional farmstead, stripped bare by roving whites or desperate bandits. The pace was grueling. Daenerys seldom dismounted, except to walk among the wagons, offering words of encouragement. Jon scouted ahead with Tormund and a few Dothraki outriders, searching for signs of the enemy. At night, they formed a tight encampment, ringed by sharpened stakes, with watchfires constantly stoked. Daenerys slept beneath a makeshift pavilion, Drogon roosting nearby, though she rarely found more than a few hours' rest. Each time she closed her eyes, she pictured the White Walkers closing in, or Jorah dying in her arms, or the flicker of an assassin's blade in the darkness. On the third morning, as the column advanced along a muddy road, riders appeared on the horizon. At first, Daenerys tensed, fearing White Walkers or worse. But as the riders drew closer, they raised a banner bearing the Mockingbird, Littlefinger's sigil. They hailed the main force and approached at a gallop, 6 strong. Their leader, a lean man with a scar across one cheek, reined in before Daenerys and Jon. "Message from Lord Royce of the Vale," he panted. "He rides to meet you on the Rosby Road with a few hundred knights. If the weather holds, you'll find them in 2 days' time. Also, we have word that Euron Greyjoy's fleet has been sighted near the Blackwater Bay. Seems he's come to blockade any undead that might try to cross the sea, or so he claims. Or maybe to secure his own position." Then, Daenerys glanced at Jon. "Euron Greyjoy, the self-styled king of the Iron Islands. I heard he survived multiple assassination attempts." Jon's jaw tightened. "He's a dangerous man. Maybe he's had a change of heart, or maybe he's looking to exploit the chaos. But if he truly has his fleet near the bay, then perhaps King's Landing is better defended than we hope." Daenerys nodded. "Very well. Return to Lord Royce and inform him we'll continue on this route. We'll meet him, then move on King's Landing together. The gods know we need every man." "Then no." The riders saluted and galloped off. Daenerys urged the army forward, hoping that each league brought them closer to a position where they might stand a chance against the undead. Along the route, snow began to fall more heavily, swirling in gusts that painted the world in a cold white haze. Some nights, the wind howled with a mournful voice. No one spoke of it, but they all feared what might be riding on that wind. The next day brought a quiet gloom. Visibility was poor, and the host moved slowly, foot soldiers slogging through slush, horses stumbling on half-frozen mud. Daenerys rode at the head, scanning the drifted landscape. An unnatural hush fell over the column, broken only by the clank of armor and the panting of beasts. Drogon wheeled overhead, occasionally letting out a roar that reverberated across the emptiness. At midday, they reached a small crossroads, where a battered sign indicated Rosby lay southeast. King's Landing south, Maidenpool north, and east. The sign was so weathered it was barely legible. There, they found the remnants of a village. Smoke still rose from a few huts, and shapes shambled between the charred buildings. For a moment, Daenerys feared it was the Whites, but as they drew closer, the shapes stumbled out onto the road. Refugees, hollow-eyed men, women, and children. They fell at the feet of the Dothraki vanguard, begging for food, shivering in ragged clothes. Daenerys dismounted. Fury and sorrow mingling in her heart when she saw their condition. The survivors were covered in ash and dirt, some with fresh wounds that bled onto the snow. "What happened here?" she asked a woman who clung to her ankles, sobbing. The woman stared up with wide, haunted eyes. "Bandits. Then some monsters came. Our men tried to fight them off, but they died. Then they rose again and killed more. We fled. The dead kept moving south. John dismounted as well, kneeling. When did this happen? The woman shuddered. 2 days passed. No, maybe 3. The nights blend together. Please, do you have any bread? Daenerys motioned for her soldiers to provide what little they could spare. She helped the woman to her feet, gently. As the refugees took the food, some wept with desperate gratitude. Others simply chewed in numb silence. Among them, Daenerys spotted an older man with a makeshift bandage over his eye. He caught her gaze and approached cautiously, bowing his head. "My queen," he said, voice cracked. "If you are heading south, watch for the dead. They have a giant with them, an undead giant that tore down our walls." Dread coiled in Daenerys's belly. She recalled one, the friendly giant who had once helped Jon at Winterfell, and wondered if his people were all doomed to become enslaved to the Night King's will. "Thank you," she murmured. "We'll be careful. Will you come with us?" He shook his head, tears in his one good eye. "We lost everything. But perhaps, yes, there's nothing left for us here. My grandson is too young to travel alone. If you'll have us, we'll join your column. We can help gather wood, tend the fires." Daenerys nodded. "Yes, come. Though the journey is dangerous, it's better than staying in this ruin." Then ciao. They added the new refugees to their ranks, though the supply situation grew more dire each time they welcomed more mouths to feed. Jon said little, but Daenerys could see the anguish in his eyes. She shared it. Leaving these people to starve or freeze was unconscionable, yet each addition slowed their pace and depleted resources. The alternative was to abandon them, which neither she nor Jon could stomach. So onward they trudged, heavier in number and weight of conscience, forging a path through the snowfall. That night, they made camp near the crossroads. Snow fell in steady drifts, blanketing the tents. Fires burned low, as firewood grew scarce. Daenerys walked among the lines, receiving reports. Little sign of White Walkers yet, but the scouts were uneasy. Tormund complained of how the forest to the east felt too quiet. Arya kept watch from a vantage on a small hill, eyes scanning for any flicker of movement beyond the firelight. Daenerys was about to return to her tent, when she heard a sudden commotion near the western perimeter of camp. Shouts. A horn blast. She ran, cloak whipping in the icy wind. Soldiers hurried the same direction. Swords drawn. Her heart thudded, expecting whites, but as she pushed through the ring of men, she saw it was a single intruder. A figure in dark clothing, half collapsed in the snow, muttering. Another wildling had pinned them. Ghost stood nearby, teeth bared. Jon arrived at the same moment. "Who is it?" he demanded. The wildling yanked the intruder's hood back, revealing a boyish face with a swirl of fresh bruises. Caught him sneaking in. Wouldn't say who he was. Tried to stab me, he did. "Medicine mine." The prisoner spat blood into the snow. "I come with news," he rasped. "News for the queen. Let me speak or kill me." Daenerys hesitated, then gestured for the wildling to haul him upright. "Speak. Who are you?" He shivered violently, eyes flitting between her and Jon. "I'm no one," he said in a tone that made Arya, who had just arrived, stiffen in recognition of that phrase. "But I bring a message from Euron Greyjoy. He wishes to form an alliance with the Dragon Queen to battle the dead. He waits near the Rosby Road with some of his men. If you meet him, he'll swear fealty. He says the sea is your best hope if the land falls." Now. A swirl of suspicion crackled through the watchers. Tormund scowled. Jon took a step closer, scanning the boy's face. "If you're a messenger, why so secretive? Why stab at the guard?" The boy coughed, trembling. "Because I was afraid. This camp is well guarded, and your watchers weren't too friendly. I only tried to pass unnoticed, but I was spotted. Let me go. Lord Euron promised me gold if I delivered the message, but I've done so now. Release me." "Then shall." Daenerys glanced at Arya, who watched the boy like a hawk. Arya shook her head subtly. Daenerys understood the meaning, Something about this was off. The mention of "I am no one" pricked Daenerys' nerves. Could this be a ruse by the Faceless men to lure them into a trap? "Keep him under guard," Daenerys ordered, turning away. "We'll see if Euron truly awaits us on the Rosby Road. In the morning, we'll decide our next move." The messenger shrieked in protest, but Tormund cuffed him across the head, hauling him off to a guarded tent. Arya gave Daenerys a measured look. He could be one of them. That phrase, "I'm no one," is too close to the house's teachings. They might be laying a snare. Daenerys let out a shaky breath. "Then we remain on our guard. I suppose we have little choice but to proceed. We need every ally, and if Euron has an actual force, ignoring him could be fatal. But we'll treat it as a potential ambush. Meanwhile, watch that messenger. If he tries anything strange..." Arya nodded. "Consider it done." Dawn came with leaden skies and swirling snow that made it feel more like twilight. The march resumed, slower than ever, the column struggling through drifts that sometimes reached the horses' hocks. The messenger, tied to one of the wagons, refused to say more about Euron's intentions. Daenerys sent out advanced scouts, but the storm limited visibility. Drogon flew overhead trying to pierce the clouds, but even the dragon's sight was hampered. By midday, the wind lessened, and they came upon a vantage point overlooking a slope of frosted meadows. There, through the thinning snow, they spied a contingent of Ironborn, men with the Kraken sigil on their ragged banners, pitched in a small encampment near a half-frozen stream, and at their center stood a gaunt figure with a patch over one eye, clad in dark leather. Daenerys recognized him from earlier descriptions and from the tidbits gleaned through her spies. Euron Greyjoy. The tension in her host was palpable as they approached. The Ironborn ringed the clearing, weapons at the ready. Daenerys led a small party forward. Jon, Arya, Tormund, plus half a dozen Unsullied. Ghost prowled at Jon's side. Euron waited in the center, leaning against a tall spear. He seemed oddly casual, as though the bitter cold did not affect him, or he was beyond caring. When they were within speaking distance, he straightened and cast Daenerys a grandiose bow. "Your Grace," Euron said, grinning crookedly. "How lovely to meet you again in the flesh. I hear you've had some trouble with the dead, and with those sneaky Braavosi cutthroats. They tried to kill me once, you know. They failed." Daenerys regarded him warily. "So I've heard. You claim you want an alliance?" "Now," he laughed, the sound echoing across the snowy clearing. "Let's not pretend we like each other, Dragon Queen. But the dead have a way of uniting the living, don't they? My fleet is in Blackwater Bay, imposing a blockade so the Whites can't find ships to cross or any half-brained lords can't slip away. I also control several key points along the coast. If you want to keep these creatures from swarming over every inch of Westeros, you'll need the seas secured. That's where I come in." He spread his arms dramatically. "I propose an alliance. You don't kill me, I don't kill you. We fight the dead together. And afterwards, well, we'll see." "And so?" Jon's expression darkened. "And what do you want from us? You wouldn't be here if you didn't desire something." Euron fixed his single eye on Jon. "I'm no fool, Snow. I want the Iron Islands recognized under my rule. If the realm survives this endless night, I want the official blessing of the Dragon Queen. Let the Ironborn remain free in our domain. I might even kneel if it suits the moment." He sniffed at the snowy air. "But we can negotiate the details once we've hammered the dead into dust." Daenerys' gaze flicked to Arya, who studied Euron with a predator's intensity, as though searching for a giveaway that he might also be an imposter. But this seemed to be the real Euron, oozing arrogance and bravado. Daenerys considered her options. She needed the seas secure, and the Iron Fleet was formidable. She also knew Euron's reputation: cunning, cruel, unpredictable. Still, as he said, the dead forced alliances that would never have occurred otherwise. She inclined her head. "Help us defeat the White Walkers, and I'll consider your terms." Euron clapped his hands, smiling wide. "Wonderful. Let's not dawdle in the cold then. My men and I will ride with you to King's Landing. We can ensure your slow wagons aren't overrun. Perhaps the old city might hold out with enough of us there to fight." Tormund spat into the snow, unimpressed, but said nothing. Euron's men began to ready themselves, packing their minimal gear. While they worked, Euron sidled closer to Daenerys, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Rumors say the House of Black and White hunts you. They won't stop until you're dead, or they're all gone. I killed a few of them myself, so they probably hate me even more than you. Care to compare body counts, Dragon Queen?" He let out a low chuckle. Daenerys' lip curled. "This is not a contest. Their attempts have cost me good men, my friends. If you're seeking to brag—" He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not trivializing your losses. But if they come for you again, you might want to consider the joys of unpredictability. Trick them. Keep them guessing. That's how I survived." She met his single eye, unwavering. "I'd rather rely on loyalty and open alliances than constant trickery. But if you have a suggestion to keep me alive, I'm listening." He grinned. "I might. For later. Let's just say I know a thing or two about illusions. The black priests of the Basilisk Isles taught me some unsavory arts. If you ever find yourself truly cornered, come see me." Jon stepped in, placing himself between Daenerys and Euron. "Leave her be. If you're with us, you follow her command." Euron raised his hands in mock surrender, that grin lingering. "Of course, O King in the North. Lead on." Then, thus Euron Greyjoy and his Ironborn joined the column. The presence of these new men added another layer of tension. Wildlings, Northerners, Dothraki, Unsullied, Vale Knights, and now Ironborn. All had reasons to mistrust each other. Yet all shared a mutual desire to survive. Sometimes that was enough. They resumed their march. One day became 2, then 3, forging steadily through fields and forests. Snow occasionally turned to freezing rain, soaking clothes, making progress miserable. They faced sporadic attacks by small clusters of whites, scouts perhaps, or strays from the main undead host. The living dispatched them, though not without losses. Each time a man fell, the survivors rushed to burn the body before it could rise again. Daenerys and Drogon soared overhead in the worst skirmishes, unleashing blasts of fire that turned whites to ash in seconds. The men hailed her as a savior, though she felt hollow inside. Each burn reeked of burning flesh, living or dead. When at last they reached the outskirts of Rosby, they found Lord Royce's knights waiting. The Vale banners stood in neat rows, horses stamping at the frost. Royce himself, a stout man with a stern face, greeted them formally, bowing to both Daenerys and Jon Daeon. Sansa embraced him as a loyal retainer of House Arryn. He promised a few hundred more knights would join them if they pushed on toward the city. Word was traveling fast now. The living were rallying under the Targaryen banner, or so the scattered lords claimed. Some part of Daenerys rejoiced at that notion, but she knew how fragile these alliances were. And behind her, Euron lounged on his horse, casting lazy stares at the new arrivals. That night, the combined host made camp near Rosby's old keep, a modest fortress that had seen better days. The local lord had fled or died long ago. The keep was locked, presumably with a small garrison inside, but no one answered their knocks. Rather than waste time on a siege, Daenerys ordered them to move on in the morning. But the local area offered a respite. A few storehouses were found intact, containing some salted fish and turnips. The hungry soldiers devoured them gratefully. Daenerys took the opportunity to hold another war council, this time with Lord Royce present. Tyrion managed to attend as well, though he looked pale and drenched in sweat. The maesters feared infection in his crossbow wound, but he insisted on being present. "We're less than a week's march from King's Landing," he said, leaning heavily on the edge of the table. "The city is likely in chaos, even though we left a caretaker force behind. Viserion might be controlling the skies, but the small folk will be frightened. We need a plan on how to maintain order once we arrive." Daenerys nodded. "We'll station the Unsullied to keep the peace, while the Dothraki remain outside the city walls, patrolling for undead. I'll need to coordinate with the caretaker commander on the gates, and I have to assume the Faceless men might already be inside, waiting." John crossed his arms, thinking. We can't fortify the entire city. It's huge. But we can ensure the Red Keep remains secure, at least. If the White Walkers reach the capital, we'll want a stronghold. That might mean tearing down some of the outer slums to create a kill zone, or forcibly removing the population from areas we can't defend. Dundon. Tyrion frowned. That will not endear us to the people, but it might be the only way. Some might volunteer to flee on ships, but Euron's blockade is there, and who knows how many vessels remain. We'll do what we can to keep the peace. With winter and war upon us, the simplest solution is to unify behind one leader. Lord Royce, arms folded across his armored chest, spoke plainly. And that leader is you, Queen Daenerys. Or King Jon. Oh. Daenerys glanced at Jon, who spoke first. We've formed an alliance. We both seek to protect the realm, not rule it alone. The time for petty squabbling over titles is past. Royce looked unconvinced, but bowed his head. As you say, my lord, my loyalty lies with Lady Sansa and House Arryn. If she trusts you, I will fight in your ranks. Euron cleared his throat loudly. Can we skip to the part where we talk about the real threat? The White Walkers. Once we're inside the city, how do we keep those frosty fiends from marching right through the gates? If they surround us, no resupply, no escape. We'd be cornered. Then, Daenerys had asked herself the same question 100 times. The city's population was enormous. If it turned into a siege of the dead, the streets would run red, and any white infiltration could spread in hours, turning King's Landing into a slaughterhouse. We have dragons, she said at last, though her voice lacked confidence. We have some dragonglass weapons, thanks to Jon's efforts. We have men from across Westeros. The city walls are formidable. Perhaps we can hold out until spring. Dying. No one spoke the dreaded possibility that there might be no spring if the Night King triumphed. They adjourned with heavy hearts. The next few days of marching passed in a blur of cold, hunger, and anxiety. The roads occasionally teemed with refugees heading south. Some recognized Daenerys's banners and latched onto the column. Seeking protection, she accepted them all, though it worsened the supply crisis. Jon took to riding at the rear, ensuring stragglers weren't picked off by bandits or renegade whites. At night, the Faceless men threat lingered. Soldiers found a suspicious corpse, one of their own, with a slit throat, identity uncertain. But no assassin was discovered that evening. On another night, a wildling claimed to see a figure wearing the face of his brother, who died 2 weeks ago. The figure vanished in the darkness. The growing sense of dread weighed on everyone's spirits. At last, the battered host reached a vantage from which King's Landing's walls could be glimpsed in the distance, a shadow on the horizon. Smoke rose from within the city, though whether from industry or unrest was unclear. Daenerys halted the column, letting the soldiers catch their breath. A hush fell as they gazed upon the capital. The skies above were hazy with clouds, but in a break of sunlight, Daenerys could just make out the shape of Viserion gliding near the Red Keep's towers. Some in the ranks let out a cheer, heartened to see a friendly dragon. Finally, muttered Euron, stroking his patch. Home sweet home. Daenerys raised a hand. We'll split into formations. The Dothraki will circle the city, driving out any whites that might be skulking in the countryside. The Ironborn will secure the harbors. The rest of us will enter and reassert control. We have to organize quickly. Any chaos in the city could be deadly. Then? Jon nodded. I lead the northern host inside. Sansa, Arya, Tormund, you'll help keep order. Brienne, please coordinate with the city guard. What remains of it, we'll set up in the Red Keep for now. With that, they advanced. The gates, battered but standing, opened at their approach once Daenerys' caretaker forces recognized her banners. Throngs of hungry smallfolk lined the streets, eyes wide as they watched the army pour in. They gaped at Drogon and Rhaegal overhead, the latter still bearing scars, but able to fly short distances. Soldiers soon began clearing the main avenues to make way for the wagon trains. Nisande oversaw a frantic distribution of what meager food supplies they had, though it amounted to little more than bread crusts and salted fish. The city had been starved in recent weeks, lacking stable leadership. Many of the caretaker soldiers looked exhausted, relieved that their queen had returned with reinforcements. Amid the swirl of arrivals, Daenerys rode to the Red Keep, flanked by Jon, Arya, and a troop of Unsullied. They passed the old market squares, saw shuttered shops, burned homes, desperate faces. A few welcomed them with cheers, others with fearful silence. When they reached the outer walls of the keep, Daenerys dismounted, letting a stable boy lead her mare away. Tyrion's wagon rolled up behind them, and the hand of the queen stumbled out, leaning heavily on a cane. He gazed at the castle gates with haunted eyes. Inside the keep, the throne room loomed, lit by the pale light that fell through broken windows. The Iron Throne stood empty, a silent testament to the blood spilled for its sake. Daenerys stared at it, recalling the many times she'd imagined sitting upon it as the rightful ruler. Now, it felt more like a tombstone than a symbol of power. She turned away. "Find the caretaker commander," she said to Grey Worm's stand-in, though Grey Worm himself was not present. He was still recovering. "We need a full report on the city's defenses and supply situation." While the soldier hurried off, Arya drifted toward Daenerys. "I'm going to sweep the corridors," she murmured. "If any faceless men have infiltrated, I'll try to spot them." Jon remained at Daenerys' side, glancing at the throne. "We've made it here, but the real fight is yet to come. If the White Walkers arrive in a week or a month, are we ready to face them?" Daenerys could not lie. "I don't know, but we have the largest army in the realm, 3 dragons, and the city walls. If that's not enough, then the living stand no chance anywhere." They ascended to the royal apartments, rummaging through the dusty chambers. The caretaker forces had used some of the space, but large portions of the keep were abandoned. Daenerys claimed a modest suite for herself and her closest advisors, wanting to remain close to the men, not perched in the highest tower. She set about organizing a meeting that very evening with the city's few functioning council members, former merchants, lesser lords who had survived the assassinations or hidden from them. She found them in a council chamber that smelled of mold. The men looked haggard, speaking in hushed tones of riots and plague, of hidden murders. It seemed that the faceless men's presence had indeed extended here. Several local notables had vanished under suspicious circumstances. The city's granaries were nearly empty. One guard captain confided that some of the gold cloaks had turned to banditry, lacking pay or leadership. Daenerys cut through their chatter. "We have but a little time," she said firmly. "Either the White Walkers come soon, or the House of Black and White kills us from within. We must form a united front. That means rationing food carefully, patrolling the streets to prevent riots, fortifying the gates, and—" Her words were interrupted by a commotion outside. Shouts, heavy footsteps. Daenerys shot to her feet, followed by Jon. They bolted into the corridor to find 2 Unsullied restraining a bloodied man who was wailing. As Daenerys approached, one Unsullied stepped back, letting her see that the man was, in fact, wearing scraps of battered armor and a tabard bearing the flaming heart of Aralor, Melisandre's old religion. He looked delirious, eyes rolling. "What is the meaning of this?" Daenerys demanded. The man gasped. "Please, Your Grace, I bring word from the fields beyond the city. The dead have been sighted. They march faster than we believed. They could be here in days." Jon took a sharp breath. "Days? How many?" "Ben." The man shuddered. "A flood. Thousands upon thousands. I was with a group of Aralor followers traveling from the Stormlands, trying to help survivors. We saw them tearing through a village near the Windwater. An army, an unending wave. They'll be at the city's gates soon." Daenerys' heart hammered. She exchanged a glance with Jon. This was sooner than they'd hoped. They had barely arrived, barely begun organizing. Now the dead were practically upon them. "We must prepare at once," she said, steeling herself. "Sound the alarms, fortify the walls, bring every man capable of fighting to the barricades. The dragons will patrol the skies. The time for half measures is over." Word spread like wildfire through King's Landing. Soldiers scrambled to their posts, archers mustered atop the walls, men hammered planks into barricades in the outer districts. Refugees poured in, seeking shelter behind the thick inner defenses. Tormund led the Dothraki and wildlings to clear out any whites that might infiltrate through the labyrinthine slums, while Euron and his Ironborn took over the harbor, chaining the entrances shut to prevent any undead from drifting in by water. The city trembled with collective panic as everyone realized that the Night King's host was imminent. Amid the chaos, Arya found Daenerys on a battlement overlooking the northern roads into the city. The queen was gazing out at the darkening horizon, where a line of storm clouds loomed. Drogon circled overhead, occasionally spewing a jet of fire to light the twilight. Jon stood nearby, speaking with Davos and Tyrion about final defensive measures. Arya approached, breath visible in the chilly evening air. "They're coming," she said quietly. "The Night King? We have the dragon glass, the dragons. Do we have anything else? Magic?" "The Lord of Light? I've seen strange forces at play before." Daenerys shook her head. "I have no red priestess, no miracle. Only what we've mustered. Perhaps that will suffice. Perhaps it won't." "Show." Arya was silent for a moment, then said, "If the Faceless men try again, they'll likely do so at the moment of our greatest peril. They thrive in confusion. If you're in the midst of battle, you must keep watchers around you who can confirm your identity. We can't afford to lose you now." Daenerys studied the younger woman's somber gaze, reminded again of how Arya had trained in those deadly arts. "Thank you," Daenerys said softly. "Stay close if you can. If they come for me, I trust you to see it first." "Menems." Arya only nodded, stepping away as Jon joined Daenerys at the parapet. The cold wind ruffled his cloak, and behind him, Ghost panted quietly. They stood together, queen and king, watching the last shreds of daylight. The city lay beneath them, a labyrinth of rooftops, battered spires, flickering torches. Far beyond, the shadows thickened. Daenerys thought she saw a faint glimmer of movement in the distance, but it might have been her imagination. Jon set a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll face them, side by side." "And she placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin despite the chill. "Yes," she whispered. "We will." That night, few slept. Scouts rode out in all directions, some returning with reports of whites within a day's march, others never returning at all. The men on the walls prayed to a dozen gods. In the Great Sept's ruins, still damaged from Cersei's wildfire carnage long ago, small folk lit candles, begging the Seven for mercy. The tension in the air was a living thing, a monstrous hush before a storm that could end the world. Sometime after midnight, Daenerys managed to steal a moment's respite in her chambers. She dozed fitfully, fully clothed, a cloak serving as a blanket. In her half-dream, she saw a vast white plain, the Night King staring at her with ice-blue eyes. Then a sudden jolt woke her, a hand on her shoulder. She blinked to find Missandei leaning over her, trembling. "Your Grace," Missandei whispered. "There's trouble." Daenerys shot upright. "The dead." Missandei shook her head. We're not certain, but an alarm was raised by the city guard. Someone is moving through the keep, killing soldiers. They say it's a shadow." And so. Daenerys' heart hammered. The Faceless men. She swung her feet off the bed, grabbing her sword belt. She had become accustomed to wearing a blade at her waist, though she was no master swordswoman. "Gather the Unsullied. We'll search the corridors." Missandei looked terrified but nodded. Daenerys pulled open the door and hurried out into the lamplit hall. Shouts echoed from below. At a junction, half a dozen Unsullied formed a defensive cordon around a fallen comrade, whose throat had been cut. Blood pooled on the tile floor, reflecting the wavering torchlight. A swirl of footprints led away, disappearing into the darkness. Jon and Arya arrived from the opposite side, both armed. Arya knelt by the body, pressing 2 fingers to the man's neck, though it was obvious he was beyond help. "Fresh kill," she murmured. "They can't be far." Jon stiffened. scanning the shadows. "We need to corner them. They might be after Daenerys or me or Tyrion or all of us. Let's not split up too much." Daenerys motioned for two Unsullied to remain behind and guard Missandei. She and Jon followed Arya down a narrow corridor that led deeper into the keep. The torches mounted on the walls flickered, casting dancing shadows that made Daenerys' breath quicken. The corridors seemed to stretch on forever. Now and then they passed another body, a city guard, stabbed in the back, or an unfortunate stable hand, lying in a pool of blood. Whoever the assassin was, they were moving with speed and ruthlessness, leaving a trail of corpses. The smell of blood and fear thickened the air. A scuffling sound drew them onward. They rounded a corner to see a figure standing over the body of an Unsullied, yanking a blade free. The figure wore plain clothes, something akin to a cook's uniform. At the sight of Daenerys and Jon, the assassin darted away, stepping into the gloom. Arya sprinted after them, silent as a cat, dagger in hand. Daenerys and Jon followed, heart pounding. They cornered the figure in a dead-end storehouse, where crates of old provisions were stacked. Arya circled to the left, dagger raised. Jon raised Longclaw. Daenerys remained at the entrance, sword trembling in her grip. The figure stood in the center, face hidden by shadows. Then, slowly, the figure turned, features shifting. Daenerys watched in horror as the assassin's visage rippled, revealing a man's face she had never seen, then a woman's, then something formless. It was as though the assassin was letting them see the truth of their transformation. A voice emerged, deep and hollow. "Your time has come, Targaryen," the assassin intoned. "The many-faced god is owed this death. No dragon can protect you. No legion can stop fate." Arya took a step forward, expression unreadable. "I was once like you," she said softly. "But I found another way. Let her go." The assassin laughed, a harsh rasp. "Another way? You betray the house you served, girl. You will die as well. All of you. The contract is sealed." Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. "You'll have to go through us." The assassin lunged with lightning speed. Arya met them mid-stride, steel flashing. Jon tried to angle in, but the pair was a blur of strikes and counters, footsteps pattering on the stone floor. Daenerys pressed herself against the wall, watching with clenched teeth. Every time she thought to move, the risk of interfering with Arya's deadly dance was too great. Arya's dagger flicked in a quick pattern, aiming for the assassin's heart. But the assassin feinted, hooking Arya's arm and twisting. Arya hissed, flipping backward to escape. The assassin whirled, launching a short throwing knife at Jon, who barely managed to bat it aside with Longclaw, the clang of steel echoing. Daenerys felt her pulse thunder in her ears. This was life or death, the final attempt to remove her from the realm of the living. Arya advanced again, feinting high, then ducking low. The assassin tried to slash at her face, but she twisted, driving the hilt of her dagger into the assassin's ribs. The assassin grunted, staggering, but swiftly regained footing. A swirl of movement, and the assassin sent Arya's dagger skidding across the floor. Arya rolled away, snatching Jon's spare dragonglass knife from his belt. She hurled it at the assassin. The figure dodged, but not entirely. The blade sliced a deep cut along the shoulder. The assassin roared, turning that fury on Daenerys. In a single burst of speed, the killer dashed forward, blade aimed at Daenerys' chest. Daenerys barely had time to lift her sword. The impact jarred her arms. Fear exploded in her mind. She stumbled backward into a crate. Jon lunged from behind, hooking the assassin's arm with Longclaw. The assassin spun, forced to disengage from Daenerys. Arya seized that moment, sliding in low and raking her blade across the assassin's thigh. Blood splattered. Snarling, the assassin kicked Arya away and twisted out of Jon's grip. The figure's face flickered again, momentarily revealing a visage that Daenerys thought might be a distorted reflection of her own. The shock of seeing her own face on the assassin nearly made her drop her sword. The assassin used the distraction, slashing wildly at Jon's exposed flank. Jon managed to shift enough that the blade only gashed his side, not lethal but enough to make him grunt in pain. Arya's eyes flared with rage. She sprang forward, launching a rapid series of attacks. The assassin blocked or dodged most, but Arya was relentless. She pivoted, hooking her arm around the assassins and driving the dragonglass blade deep into their side. A gasp hissed through the assassin's lips. Jon, ignoring the pain in his own side, joined the fray, plunging long claw into the assassin's back. Blood sprayed across the crates. The assassin convulsed, eyes wide, face shifting in a flurry of stolen visages. Cersei, Marjorie, a faceless blank, a swirl of monstrous illusions. Then the body sagged, limbs going limp. Arya and Jon let go, stepping back as the assassin collapsed to the floor. A final breath rattled in the dying throat. Daenerys stood there, chest heaving, sword trembling in her grip. She took a step closer, peering at the corpse. The face now looked like a pale, unremarkable woman, hair cropped short, eyes vacant. Blood spread in a sticky pool. Arya let out a shaky exhale, bending to retrieve her original dagger from the ground. "That might not be the last of them," Jon muttered, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "But it's one more." Daenerys found her voice, breath ragged. "Let the city guards know. We must scour every corridor. No more infiltration." Arya rose, wiping blood from her cheek. "We'll do our best, but as long as the contract stands." She trailed off. Daenerys knew the rest. The House of Black and White would keep coming, though perhaps their resources were stretched to the limit. Maybe this was one of the last. Either way, the immediate threat was handled. Daenerys clutched her sword, swallowing bile. She was so tired of death. But the dawn was coming, and with it, the real war. The White Walkers, only days away. They carried Jon to the maesters. His wound was not mortal, though painful. Arya accompanied them, her own bruises blossoming. Daenerys followed, heart pounding. In the corridor, more Unsullied rushed up, uncertain if there was another attacker. Daenerys assured them the danger was past for now. All around, men looked to her for guidance, some trembling, some resolute. She summoned what remained of her composure and told them to maintain vigilance, that she was safe, that the assassin was dead. When dawn broke over King's Landing, the city braced itself. The watchers on the walls stared at the horizon. Snow fell softly, blanketing the broken streets and red-tiled roofs. Smoke rose from thousands of hearths as the populace tried to keep warm. Soldiers manned the battlements, archers lined the towers, and the dragons soared overhead, roaring defiance at the storm clouds gathering in the north. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's saddle, scanning the city below. She had donned fresh battle attire, strapped with dragonglass daggers, every nerve taut. Jon, bandaged but upright, mounted a horse near the gates. Arya and Sansa stood with the northern host, each in their own armor. Euron's Ironborn had taken up positions at the piers, and Tormund's wildlings formed a roaming defense in the outlying districts. Everyone waited, hearts pounding. And then, in the distance, a great roar of sound, like thunder, but continuous. The watchers on the northern walls saw the first ranks of whites shamble into view, a writhing mass of death stretching to the horizon. Towering above them, an undead giant moved with horrifying power, smashing aside obstacles. Pale riders on undead horses glided between the ranks, White Walkers, their eyes glowing an otherworldly blue. And at their center, astride a skeletal steed, was the Night King himself, silent and implacable. A collective gasp of fear rippled through the city. Men prayed, women clutched children, soldiers hoisted weapons with trembling hands. Daenerys felt Drogon's muscles tense beneath her, sensing the presence of ancient, icy magic. She glanced down at Jon, who looked up at her, giving a small, grim nod. This was it, the final confrontation that would decide the fate of Westeros, a city once ruled by petty kings and queens, now forced to unite or perish. She spurred Drogon to take flight, rising above the spires of the Red Keep. Rhaegal, still bearing scars, joined her in the sky, letting out a piercing shriek. Below, Viserion answered from a perch near the dragon pit, though the third dragon quickly rose as well, wings beating the cold air. The combined roar of 3 dragons echoed across the city, met by the eerie silence of the undead legions outside the walls. A hush, a heartbeat. Then, with terrifying inevitability, the White Walkers advanced, the White Army surging forward to besiege King's Landing. Steel clashed on stone as the first lines of Whites reached the outer barricades. Archers loosed volleys of dragon-glass-tipped arrows. Some Whites fell, pinned to the ground, but countless more took their place, climbing over the broken bodies of their fellows. Fire catapults hurled flaming pitch, igniting dozens at a time, but still they came. The monstrous giant roared, swinging a club that shattered a barricade in seconds. Men screamed, hacked, died, rose again. From above, Daenerys commanded Drogon to unleash dragonfire. A scorching torrent engulfed the swarm below, incinerating hundreds, the flames reflecting off the city's walls. Rhaegal and Viserion joined in, blanketing the fields in a sea of flame. For a moment, Daenerys felt hope that the sheer power of the dragons could break the horde. But the wave of Whites was unending. They scrambled through the fires, their flesh charring but their undead limbs still grasping. The White Walkers themselves stood amid the inferno, seemingly immune, icy auras snuffing out patches of flame. On the walls, Jon led the defense, longclaw in hand. He fought with savage determination, slashing Whites that clambered up siege ladders. The men around him died quickly or pressed on with stoic resolve. Tormund's war cries carried over the din. Euron's Ironborn volleyed bolts from scorpion-like ballistae, each bolt tipped with dragonglass. Sansa and Arya directed archers, rallying whenever a section of wall faltered. Scenes of chaos and despair multiplied. Yet the living did not yield. Minutes bled into hours. The sun climbed higher, hidden behind heavy clouds. Daenerys soared overhead, raining fire again and again, but each pass left her dragons weary and the dead still thronging. The city's outer defenses began to buckle. The undead giants smashed a gate, letting Whites spill into the streets. Screams echoed among the narrow alleys. Dothraki screamers charged, arcs flashing. But for every White they cut down, 2 more advanced. Daenerys circled near the plaza outside the Red Keep, turning it into a furnace of dragon flame. Thousands of Whites perished, but still, the tide pushed forward. Somewhere in the chaos, the Night King guided his horse through the carnage. Glimpses of him reached Daenerys' eyes, an unmoving figure of ice and malevolence. At one point, Rhaegal dove at him, unleashing a torrent of flame. The Night King raised his spear of ice, parted the flames and struck Rhaegal's flank. The dragon roared in agony, skidding across a row of buildings, crushing them under his bulk. Daenerys cried out, spurring Drogon to savage the undead flank. Viserion, roaring defiance, strafed the Whites from another angle. In the thick of the fighting, the city guard, the Vale Knights, the Northern men, Wildlings, Dothraki, and Ironborn converged. They formed pockets of resistance, holding squares and barricades. The clang of steel on steel, the crackle of fire, the shrieks of the dying battered every sense. Euron fought with reckless abandon along the docks, matching each kill with a riotous laugh. Tormund tore through Whites with the fury of a man possessed, yelling for the free folk. Sansa and Arya coordinated archers on the walls, but Whites were now scaling the battlements in horrifying numbers. Bodies piled up, living and dead. Smoke billowed across the city. Streets turned black with blood and ash. In the midst of it all, the House of Black and White was not idle. More assassins lurked, ready to strike the moment Daenerys was vulnerable. Twice, Daenerys glimpsed suspicious figures in the chaos. Once, she saw a soldier wearing Lannister colors that no longer existed, creeping toward her flank with a dagger. Another time, she saw a robed figure trying to scale Drogon's hind leg while the dragon rested for half a heartbeat. But each attempt was thwarted by the swirl of the battle, or by Ghost's savage intervention, or by Arya's watchful eye. The assassins, if any remained, found the chaos too extreme to easily isolate their target. The contract might demand success, but the living had rallied with fierce desperation. Time lost meaning. Hours of butchery painted the day. Daenerys found herself calling for a retreat to the inner walls, trying to consolidate what was left of the defenders. The outer ring of King's Landing had turned into a hellscape of fire and ice. Whites swarmed the ruins, the giant battered towers, and White Walkers advanced with icy calm. Yet the living still had thousands of men behind the inner walls, and 3 dragons, though Rhaegal was gravely wounded. Viserion continued to savage the undead ranks, roaring in anger whenever he saw White Walkers. Drogon, though tired, remained the strongest, bounding from rooftop to rooftop, incinerating entire pockets of whites whenever Daenerys commanded. As dusk approached, a final assault rocked the city. The Night King directed his forces to breach the inner gate, the last major barrier before the Red Keep. Jon, Davos, Tormund, and others mustered a heroic defense. Catapults launched flaming oil, archers loosed arrow after arrow, ballistae fired dragonglass-tipped bolts. Daenerys soared overhead, unleashing flames that turned the gate's approach into a furnace. Whites flailed in the fire, shriveling to cinders. The White Walkers advanced, the Night King raising his spear once more. He hurled it at Drogon, an icy streak that crackled with malevolent magic. Daenerys urged Drogon to dodge, but the spear grazed the dragon's wing, freezing a chunk of membrane. Drogon bellowed in pain, faltering in flight. Daenerys nearly lost her seat, clinging to the saddle. Below, the horde surged forward, the giant smashing a battered tower, bringing it crashing down. Dothraki scattered, unsullied, formed a desperate phalanx. Jon sprinted across the courtyard, leading a charge that momentarily repelled the undead at the gate. The Night King rode forward, and Daenerys realized this was the moment. If she did not act, the city would fall. She spurred Drogon down into a steep dive, ignoring the agony in his wing. Fire blasted from Drogon's jaws, engulfing the Night King's steed. The ice horse disintegrated, sending the Night King tumbling. For an instant, he was on the ground, wreathed in flickering flames. Daenerys' heart soared. Could the dragonfire finally end him? But he rose, stepping from the flames, eyes fixed on her. He lifted his spear again. Daenerys braced for the end. Suddenly, a figure darted behind the Night King, Jon Snow. He swung Longclaw with all his might, aiming for the Night King's back. The ancient foe spun with unnatural speed, blocking with an icy sword that formed out of the air. Jon pressed the attack, but the Night King parried, forcing Jon back. Sparks of frost and Valyrian steel flew. The White Walkers converged to protect their master. The situation was dire. Daenerys shouted, urging Drogon to land and help, but the dragon's wounded wing forced him to remain slightly aloft. She blasted the White Walkers with flame, yet they endured. The whites around them shriveled into ash. A swirl of motion near the gate. Arya Stark, weaving through the chaos, leaping over piles of burning whites, approached the melee. She had a dragonglass blade in each hand, face set with lethal purpose. One White Walker turned to face her, sword raised. She feinted left, rolling under his blow, then sprang up to drive a blade into his chest. The White Walker shattered into shards of ice. Another advanced, and Arya danced away, drawing it away from Jon. Jon clashed again with the Night King, struggling to find an opening. The Night King's sword radiated cold, freezing the metal of Longclaw each time they collided. Meanwhile, Daenerys spurred Drogon to unleash another inferno. This time, she aimed directly at the White Walker that threatened Arya's flank. The walker perished in flame, hissing as it dissolved into ice crystals. The giant roared from across the courtyard, pounding the inner wall with its fists. Men died, trampled or torn apart. Euron's voice carried, cursing the giant, hurling flaming spears at it. The city was crumbling, but the living fought on. Jon roared, driving Longclaw in a savage arc that knocked the Night King's sword aside. For a heartbeat, the Night King was exposed. Arya sprang, flipping over a broken pillar, landing behind him. She thrust her dragonglass blade at his neck. The Night King twisted, too swift. He caught her wrist. Jon lunged, aiming for the Night King's heart. But the Night King tore Arya's blade from her grasp, using it to parry Jon's strike. The jolt sent both Jon and Arya sprawling. The Night King towered over them, raising the stolen blade to deliver a killing blow. Daenerys screamed, pushing Drogon into a reckless dive, ignoring the pain in the dragon's wing. She soared low across the courtyard, flame building in Drogon's throat. The Night King turned his head, ice-blue eyes locking on her. He raised his hand, summoning an icy blast. Daenerys loosed the fire. Their powers met in mid-air, flame versus frost, swirling in a tempest that cracked the stone underfoot. The collision nearly knocked Daenerys from the saddle. The Night King staggered, focusing all his freezing power. Drogon roared, flame wavering. It seemed unstoppable force had met immovable object. The ground shuddered, the courtyard filling with steam and shards of ice. Jon, battered, scrambled to his feet behind the Night King. Longclaw's blade still glimmered. Arya crouched nearby, face streaked with blood. She recovered her second dragon-glass dagger, eyes ablaze with desperation. Jon caught her gaze, and they moved in tandem, a silent pact. As the Night King poured his energy into repelling Drogon's flame, Jon charged his flank, swinging for the leg, while Arya rushed the other side. The Night King, forced to defend, glanced over his shoulder. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, if such a thing could be read there. In that split second, Drogon's flames broke through the icy barrier. Fire consumed the Night King's cloak, crawling across his chest. He let out a sound like cracking glaciers, turning to fling an ice spear at Drogon. The spear grazed the dragon's flank, lodging in the scales. Drogon screeched in pain and dropped a few feet, but he kept breathing fire. The Night King convulsed under the flames, though still not destroyed. Jon hacked at the Night King's leg, but the icy armor was nearly impervious. Arya thrust her dagger at his midsection, the blade biting deeper than expected. The Night King froze, eyes flaring. A high keening sound echoed. Jon saw his chance. He reversed Longclaw's grip and drove the Valyrian steel through the crack in the Night King's chest that Arya's blade had created. A burst of freezing wind exploded outward, sending them all stumbling. The Night King let out a final unearthly shriek, body fracturing with lines of bright blue energy. For an instant, Daenerys saw the cracks spreading across his form like shattered glass. Then he disintegrated in a swirl of icy shards, carried away on the wind. Silence swept the courtyard. All around them, whites collapsed, unmoving. The giant stumbled, sank to its knees, and toppled with a thunderous crash. The White Walkers, not already destroyed, shattered into glittering fragments. The entire undead army fell like puppets with cut strings. A hush descended, broken only by the crackle of flames. Daenerys, perched atop a wounded Drogon, stared in disbelief. Jon and Arya stood in the midst of the carnage, breathing hard, battered but alive. A roar of triumph erupted from the living. Tormund, Euron, Brienne, and countless others raised their weapons, cheering at the sight of the fallen whites. The dread that had choked the city lifted in a single moment. Daenerys slid from Drogon's saddle, stumbling across the rubble-strewn courtyard, and reached Jon. Blood dripped from his armor, and he could barely stand. Arya clutched her side, breathing raggedly. But they smiled, exhausted and awestruck. Daenerys felt tears well in her eyes, relief flooding her. They had done it. The Night King was gone. Soldiers poured in, raising victory cries, though many wept at the sight of their dead friends scattered in heaps. Flames licked the city's battered walls. The stench of death remained, but the great war was ended. Daenerys, trembling, grasped Jon's hand, tears streaking her face. He squeezed back, grimy and blood-soaked, but alive. Arya nodded, dropping her dagger to embrace them, if only for a moment. The city burned in the background, a testament to the cost. But the threat was ended. As the day wore on, the living turned to the grim task of cleanup, of triage, of burying, or burning the countless bodies. Refugees emerged from hiding, weeping with relief. Dragons settled on the scorched rooftops, crooning softly, their wings torn and bodies wounded but still breathing. Euron Greyjoy swaggered through the streets, declaring that he'd help rebuild for the right price. Sansa took command of organizing supply lines. Tyrion, feverish but alive, offered what counsel he could, though his tears for the fallen were many. Tormund teased that soon enough they'd have a feast. For once, Daenerys hoped he might be right. Even as the city clung to the edges of survival, Daenerys sensed a new dawn. The undead army was vanquished, the Night King destroyed. The White Walkers were no more. That left the realm battered, broken, but breathing. The House of Black and White might yet launch another wave of assassins, but for now, the living had triumphed over the greater threat. Perhaps that changed everything, or perhaps they would still need to root out the last vestiges of that Braavosi menace. Daenerys recalled the assassin's vow: no contract is ever truly abandoned. But she found hope in the knowledge that the worst darkness had passed. In the aftermath, King's Landing stood in ruins, though not as thoroughly as it might have been if the White Walkers had won. The cost in lives was staggering. Daenerys walked among the wounded, offering what comfort she could. She found Grey Worm alive, but deeply scarred, Missandei at his side. The Unsullied had lost more than half their number, but they held their formation till the end. The Dothraki were similarly ravaged. Northerners, Vale Knights, Ironborn, Wildlings. Each faction had stories of heroism, heartbreak, and near-death escapes. That evening, as the fires began to die, Daenerys stood atop a ruined section of the Red Keep's walls, gazing at the thousands of corpses in the city's squares, the broken gate, the black smoke drifting. Jon joined her, leaning on a crutch. Arya and Sansa approached too, quiet. No cheering crowd, only the hush of exhaustion. They looked upon the city they had saved at unimaginable cost. Daenerys felt the ache in her body, a weariness in her soul that no rest could fully mend. Yet she turned to the Starks and offered a faint, heartfelt smile. "We won." She said simply, voice hushed, as though she could barely believe it. Jon nodded, closing his eyes. "We did." Sansa exhaled, tears in her eyes. "The Night King, he's truly gone. No more whites." Arya stood apart, hands folded, a watchful gleam in her gaze. She had used up her daggers in that final fight. "For now," she said quietly, "we still have the House of Black and White to worry about." She locked eyes with Daenerys. "They'll want payment in full." Daenerys nodded, the mention of the Faceless men curdling her stomach. "We will be ready. If I must spend the rest of my reign seeking them out, I will. But let's hope they realize their grand contract failed where it mattered most. If they come for us again, we will fight again." Jon set a hand on Daenerys' arm, guiding her gaze back to the battered city. "For now, though, we have the realm to piece back together. We can't let the scars of this war fester." "And no." She leaned her head against his shoulder, letting out a tremulous sigh. "No, we rebuild. We unify. No more worthless bloodshed over who sits that throne." She gestured vaguely to the Red Keep behind them, scorched and half-ruined. "Let it be a seat of hope, not fear." The four of them gazed out into the smoky twilight, the wind carrying the faint cries of survivors, the crackle of distant fires. In the sky, the last streaks of daylight bled into a bruised purple. Somewhere horns sounded, summoning men to clear corpses or bring water for the flames. The city would never be the same, nor would Westeros. But they lived. The White Walkers did not. The future lay unwritten, a precarious chance for peace. Perhaps new threats would come, perhaps assassins would strike again. But at least for this one dusk, the living had persevered against unimaginable darkness. So it was that the House of Black and White failed to achieve the crowning piece of their deadly contract. Countless claimants had indeed fallen, leaving the realm decapitated of many potential rulers. But the two who remained, Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow, endured in the face of winter, forging an alliance that outlasted the worst night in living memory. Though they carried deep scars, they stood victorious on the ruinous walls of King's Landing. The hush of triumph mingled with the mourning for all that was lost. The Iron Throne, that seat of power soaked in blood across centuries, remained battered, but unoccupied in the hall behind them. In the falling darkness, Daenerys closed her eyes, thinking of Jorah, of those who had sacrificed everything so she could stand here. She clasped Jon's hand as Arya and Sansa looked on, and together they breathed in the cold air of a realm that had endured unspeakable horrors and yet found its way through. The night was still heavy with sorrow, but dawn would come again, no longer overshadowed by the march of the dead. Perhaps, in that uncertain future, there would be a place for a new kind of rule, one untainted by the endless cycle of assassinations and Claimant's quarrels. Perhaps the kingdom could rise from the ashes, forging a new unity that might survive. And if the Faceless men tried once more to tip the balance of fate, then, as Arya Stark had warned, the living would be ready. The realm had faced death itself and refused to yield. Let the shadows come, Daenerys thought. Let them come, and we shall stand together in the light.